Okay, let's begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for April 1st, 2015. We'll start with public comment. Is there anything from the public on matters that won't be heard tonight? Okay, then what we're going to do tonight is just continue everything and come back on the 15th.
Wow, that'd be awesome.
Excellent.
Okay.
How's that looking?
No, just the following are continued. SPPF on Baxter Road, the revetment project. Squam Partners LLC at 89 Squam Road. Duke 57 LLC at 55 Duke Road, Lot 16. APG DRS Realty Trust at 90 and 84 Wawinnet Road, as well as For Saratoga LLC at 14 Tennessee Ave, and all those are continued to April 15. And if you're here to speak on one of those items and you can't come back on the 15th, we will take comments tonight, but we would encourage you to either come back or send us written comments.
Written comments are always best.
Mm-hmm. So with that,
Is there no member?
oh yes, and we do have a new member, Ben Shampoo. How could I forget? Ben Shampoo is filling in Bam's seat for the remainder of Bam's term. So we welcome him to the board.
You don't have to be nicer to him. So it's okay.
Yeah. We've already been mean to him, forgetting his name and everything. And
Welcome.
I do like the fact you started on April Fool's Day, too.
yeah. Probably not going to stay. He's probably just here for a while. And he's never coming back.
Didn't really want to do this.
I don't think they have enough humor to ever keep up.
Okay, so that takes us to the Land Bank and Conservation Foundation on Pulpus Road.
For the applicant, Gasparo, Blackburn Associates, in front of you tonight for, I believe this is the third hearing, and we had continued a couple of times to provide some additional information. We provided information that we discussed, I think, at the second hearing, which Karen had put together from the NCF, which was the photographs of where some of the wetland crossings were occurring. And then the other piece of information that I had to provide was with respect to there's going to be some disturbance to what would be considered inland banks for the culvert improvements. And so I had calculated those and revised my NOI form and submitted that to DEP as well as to your office. And that was just to summarize for the two of the culvert locations. I had calculated that there would be 40 linear feet in total of temporary disturbance and 12 permanent. And that would be essentially where the open box culvert openings are. That would be a 6-foot on each side permanent change to that bank. And again, the overall project is to provide net benefit, public access to these areas, management plan. As I don't want to take too much of your time to go over information that we've already described, but should you have any other questions about exactly what's being proposed, it's really establishing trail networks, a couple of culverts, one small walkway, and then to have an area where we would put a temporary matting down for mowing every couple of years up to sort of this landlocked area. And again, it's all going to be done by the foundation and land bank staff. So it's not some other contractor coming in there. They'll be managing this land, quite closely and under, I think, some of the best guardianship you could really have. And I think that should give the commission a good level of assurance that your protected interests will also be met on this particular project.
Are there any further questions on this project? Anything from the public? Okay, Jeff, do we have everything we need to close the hearing?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready to close?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
You may.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries with Commissioner Shampoo recused.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Okay, Harborside condominiums on Washington Street, 80 Washington.
No, she was here.
She was here.
She was here and sure something will work.
Good afternoon. Leo Azadorian with Blockland Associates for the applicant, Harborside Condominiums. We can open up that for you, because I brought some, and I want to illustrate one of the issues we need to talk about. After the last hearing, I believe we had 3 outstanding items that really needed to be addressed. The first being the material for the bulkhead, and I can understand your concern about using ACQ because of the submersion of the wood bulkhead for a period of time at high tide or mid tide. We've looked into different materials, and in all likelihood, instead of steel, we're going to use a vinyl sheet pile. I believe they used the vinyl sheet pile on Cox property off Easton Street, installed by Toscana, and they had good things to say about it. So I think to allay the fears of the commission, because I just got the impression that the ECQ, because of the submersion issue, was going to be a problem for you. So if the vinyl, and I didn't know whether you've seen it, but here's a photograph of a vinyl bulkhead. It comes in different colors, and then we could do orange or red or blue, but and it has been used on the island in the past, and it does have certain applications in a place like this. I think it would work.
It's durable enough to hold up for the...
Yeah,
for the-
it is. It is. It's
It's polyvinyl.
yeah. They've
Chloride
been
is
using it. They
PVC.
use it on the Cape quite a bit now. And but if you have an area like, for example, when we drove the sheet piles back in '92 over at the Great Harbor Yacht Club, we hit a lot of debris, and that was buried out there. There used to be old marine railway and stuff, and we had a lot of problems. And I think you might snap a few of the vinyl sheet piles over there as opposed to using steel. But steel is very expensive nowadays, because I guess you buy it from Japan. The other item that we had was access to the site, and I've had initial discussions with the selectman's office, and the initial phase was that we get through the commission and get your blessing of what we wanted to do. I spoke to the local contractor, who in all likelihood would be doing the work, and I said, well, what do you need to do it? And what he needs to do is, I've just pretty much shown an area that's about 4,600 plus square feet that we need to put in some sand fill. Obviously, we don't want to work below the tide line, and the excavators, excavators work on beaches, when they excavate out for the ditch for opening up the ponds, they work very well. He just needs a platform to work on, clean sand. So the intention was to bring in some clean sand and build a platform that he could get out there with his excavator with the attachment on it to drive the sheet piles in. I didn't calculate the volume at this stage of the game or do any grading or anything, but I wanted to get your feel on it. And the other question would be is, we could leave the sand there after it's eventually just going to wash out, or we could take it out. It's just open to discussion with the commission at this point in time. It was about a 30-foot swath that he needed to get down here and over. And the other issue, so you're aware of it, the town has a lease with the kayak rentals. It's through the 3rd week of October. The local contractor knows the gentleman who has it, and he might want to try to get in there and get October early if he could just move his activity over to the other side of the beach. But that's open for discussion as well with the gentleman who has the lease. Otherwise, we can't do any work until the 3rd week of October when he vacates the property. Obviously, we don't want to be having heavy equipment in there at the same time people are renting kayaks. And mixing and matching. There's a lot of kids in there as well, so we're trying to work something out. But if the commission doesn't have a problem with that, we'll make a formal application to the selectmen. I was told that if we get it in by the 8th, we could hear it on the 15th of April, the selectmen's meeting. And the last issue, Jeff, would be the enforcement order. We obviously need to get in there and do some cleanup and work, and you said you were going to issue an enforcement order, allow us to get in there and do that work.
Yes, we can.
Would that be forthcoming soon?
Yes.
Okay. And if there isn't any other items, I don't have any. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Leo?
I just have a question there. What is ACQ?
ACQ?
Yeah.
It's a wood preservative, has copper in it.
Yeah.
Is right, yeah. It replaced CCA with the I was thinking it. It's copper in it, and Department of Marine Fisheries has an issue with it. We've used it where we don't have this constant submerging of the bulkheads. It's fine, but apparently when the tide line comes up and above and it's being submerged, it's definitely an issue.
It's going to be detrimental to fish and to eelgrass, and it's in small amounts it's poisonous. What they use different types of copper compounds to clear out drains of vegetation, for instance. So the problem is it's in small quantities. They can build up and cause fish kills.
And like I say, it's perfectly acceptable, but if you've got a submerged situation where the bulkhead is submerged from low tide to high tide at any point in time, they don't like you to use it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Leo, on the sand fill, would you be finding beach-compatible sand? Then that way it would be easier to leave it there. Otherwise,
Yeah, we bank sand. It probably would have to be screened. Obviously, they're not going to bring in rocks. It would be just, pretty much compatible to what's there right now.
That is something,
If-
too, Mr. Chairman, you guys can specifically condition the type of sand that's there to be beach-compatible sand.
Right. And we could also give a sample prior to the filling. If Jeff wants to review it, that's fine.
Do we have this is an area where we don't have that much eelgrass immediately adjacent. We don't have to worry about smothering.
No, and we actually have received
Must have
comments
been.
from the Division of Marine Fisheries that they don't have any issues with this project as well.
And
So-
that's with the update of bringing in the sand, because I know that the first time around that we heard it, I don't think we had actually thought through the access.
No, we'll have to wait to hear if they have any additional comments from this.
Yeah.
But again, this is something that we're going to have to hold over because this is new plan
information.
information for us that we still need to have public review time on, so.
Because that was my only concern with the sand is if it's going to, I can understand them why
Right.
they need to access it. It's just whether we need to decide, does it go away or does it stay? Yeah. And if there's not areas that we have to worry about as far as changing the shallowing up the area around there, I don't know if there's any, what the closest mooring is, or
Right out in front.
Yeah,
is it right in front? Is that a concern then too?
No, but we can check, with this plan in also, I'll put it in front of the harbor masters to make sure if that sand stays or persists, that it's not going to cause some issue.
And that it's still considered land under the ocean, and probably land containing shellfish, even if shellfish aren't currently there, because it's possible habitat, or?
Yeah, land-containing shellfish is a potential habitat
Right.
as well, is included in that.
So you'd have to have waivers for both, not that they're not grantable, but we'd
Right.
have to
Right.
address the
Yes.
performance standards under both of those.
Well, obviously, the purpose of doing this is definitely the safety factor of not trying to have a huge crane and
Oh,
having
yeah.
a crane
Yeah,
operate
we
the line.
understand.
Well, it's
so-
too shallow to bring,
Yeah.
I don't think you
No, the barge
can.
is just absolutely
Yeah.
not valid.
And these are, I'm sure you told us, of Vibracore? I mean, how you're getting, or hand-driven? I mean,
Well,
not hand-driven.
they have an attachment that goes on to a excavator, and it just vibrates in.
So it's
Yeah,
not
it's
not pile driving
No,
type?
not pile driving, no.
Yeah.
It's vibrated in.
Because it would shatter the PVC into a million pieces.
Yeah. There's a special attachment that goes on the top of the vinyl.
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head if there's any issues with the PVC in the saltwater environment. I didn't, there might be, I just don't know. we hold it open, I'll probably look it up to see. I was trying to look it up quickly here.
Well, we're gonna have to hold it up because it's a new
It's probably
plan
fine, I'm
record.
just saying I
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah.
good or bad.
Anything from the public on the Harborside condominiums application? Seeing not, if there's no further questions from the commission. So Leo, do you want to continue to the
Continue.
15th?
That's fine.
Unless I hear an objection, we'll continue to the 15th. Okay,
And,
thanks,
I
Leo.
will CC the commission on the application to the selectmen as well, so.
Great.
the record of it. Okay. There's 2 copies of it. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, the town of Nantucket at 2A Easton Street.
Claire Riley with the Natural Resources Department. So the project proposed is for a renovation of the Frontpoint Propagation facility, and the 2 items under question involve the modification to an existing modification, an extension to it on the side of the building, and also a change in the direction to the stairs that lead down to the beach. The purpose of the renovation for the entire building is just to increase our production and to make it a climate-controlled facility. And we looked at other options and alternatives to create space, and this bump-out extension was really the only viable answer. And in order to create that bump-out extension, we have to switch the stairs around to the other direction.
Just to add that really quickly, the resource areas in question here are coastal beach, coastal dune, barrier beach, and they are subject to coastal storm flows. And they're within all of those. So the-
Essentially barrier beach.
Jerry's Beach is mapped as barrier beach by the state. Because I guess that the transition from channel to harbor is enough, but it's a mapped area, so it's a mapped area.
Okay.
So
What's the ground disturbance of the project?
The extension for the modification right here is cantilevered, so there's not a piling or, going down into the beach, so there is no disturbance.
And about how high off the ground is that?
5 feet.
5 foot? And the steps are effectively just moving?
Right, so they come down to, they're right in line with where the extension will be, and we're going to flip onto the other side. So it'll be a 180-degree
Okay.
rotation.
The same footprint.
Same footprint, same stairs.
new stairs.
Well, hopefully new stairs.
These are the ones that are there pretty beat up.
It's already exciting enough getting up there.
Yeah.
Construction staging for the project?
That's a good question.
I'll answer that. When we talk to them, most of the materials that'll be there will probably be held internally to the structure. Things will be delivered from the end of Easton Street to the structure as needed, but most of the work is interior.
Right.
So most of those, the hatchery will be cleaned out, and when it's gutted, most of the materials will be stored kind of within or on the back ramp, the large ramp on the back can hold
Yeah, yeah.
some of the lumber as well. So
Gotcha.
nothing will actually be left on the beach. It'll all be up within.
Yeah.
Are they changing the storage underneath the building or adding any, has that been an issue with the storms with all of the loose, not loose material, but heavy material that's,
It has been a little bit. Our hopes is to eliminate everything under the building and just with this renovation to create more storage for stuff.
kind of, that'd be probably great,
Yeah.
is more flooding happening more often.
Yeah.
So,
That's no fun to clean up.
no, I can imagine. Seems pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I just have a procedural question. From reading the material, it sounds like this is actually federal property that's leased to the town?
All right, so this is where it gets a little tricky. So the physical building itself is owned by the town in a deed that was granted by the Coast Guard the land that the building sits on is still owned by the Coast Guard and is held in right now it's a 30-year lease with the Coast Guard. And some of the terms of that lease require that the building be maintained in a good fashion. Then also that the purpose of the building, as it's intended as a shellfish and water facility, is maintained for the duration. So the lease itself doesn't expire until nearly 2040, but the building itself is owned by the town. So,
The fuel station where we own our buildings, but NCF owns the land underneath.
so the Coast Guard is under notice for all of these things. We obviously have to keep them abreast of any of these changes. So they actually have to have a separate sign-off for some of these changes as well. So this is a project that requires actual sign-off from you guys, from the HDC, from the State Historic Preservation Office, and then from the Coast Guard. So this is one of 4 approvals for design
And
stuff
they
that
don't
we
get any
need.
special exemption because they're federal.
No, because we're applying as the town and not as the federal government. But the federal government's been aware since we've applied through the CPC, so they haven't had any opposition. And I think from the sounds of our discussions with them, they're actually happy that the building is going to be kept in better repair than when it was allowed to get
I
through.
think so, yeah. Okay, anything else from the commission? Anything from the public on the town of Nantucket on this?
I had a quick question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you doing like re-roofing, re-shingling of the main body?
Yes,
So it's a whole reno of the main.
right.
And dormers are going to actually
Yeah.
change probably construction debris or
Yeah.
and staging is going to be the trickiest part there because it's such a public spot too.
God. Getting into it, getting the debris out of that would be a pain, yeah.
Someone will figure it out.
Okay, there's no further questions.
But you're not using like mats that you would use over the jetties to bring in trucks, or I mean, is there other changes
No.
to the area that are temporary that we need to know of that would affect the coastal dune?
No.
Okay.
It's already pretty heavily used, kind of traveled way to get to that building, so I don't think the construction or the architects are expecting any additional access or need or change to what's there.
Okay. So are you guys ready to close? Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
That's fine. I don't see anything from the public. Okay, so on to the, I guess, do I have a motion to close?
Move to close?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, the land bank at 21 Sacagea Road, and so I've got to recuse on this one.
Okay. This is SE 482775.
Yes. Rachel Freeman, representing the Nantucket Land Bank. And we are proposing to maintain an existing path that goes from Sacagea Road down our coastal bank to Sacagea Pond. And I did bring a couple aerial photos that I can share, which there's sort of historical areas, those are 2003, these are 75, in which you can see the path really well. I'll give that one to you guys. And this one to you guys. And from 71, you can.
I know the, yeah, I know that.
But in 75, you can see it pretty well. Whereas this guy's the only other 75 close-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might have to show those guys in 75 close-up too.
Yeah, right, yeah. I know.
So you can see it much better in the 75 than I do think it was there in 71. So we're really, for the path, I believe we're really just working to maintain something that's been in existence. At this point, we're talking about just smoothing the ground that's there. We have a continuous erosion problem based on water running from the road down the hillside, and we'd like to just maintain the berm right on the edge of the road, not just with smoothing the soil so that we're not getting continued erosion down that bank. And then we're also proposing to remove porcelainberry across the street in our parking lot area, and beyond it, there's just an entire field of porcelainberry and oriental bittersweet, and there's a small amount that has jumped onto the pond side, and we'd like to take care of that before it goes any further over there. I'd say it's about 100 to 200 square feet, and what we're proposing at this point is to treat it with triclopyr amine in the early summer, and then follow it up with glyphosate in the fall.
Yeah.
Because to the best of my
Kill
knowledge,
it.
that's the best way to go about dealing with this species.
Do you have a overhead or map GPS location of the bittersweet?
I do.
The one down
Is this down here? I'm not sure if all my stuff is fit out at the moment. Yes, it's right here. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
This is the
Yep.
location of
I do
the
have one.
porcelainberry.
Dig it out.
It's located right here. And again, there's really quite a bit of this whole area is a field. So the source is here, but we've decided this is our no-go line, and we don't want to allow anything to be on this side of the road at the moment. So that's where we're at. We're planning to remove all the dead material in the spring so that when we have fresh growth, we can easily access it, and to clip and wipe individual stems.
Yeah. Get rid of that stuff.
Has
Try.
Are there plans, Rachel, to fill in the trough at all?
I think there will be. The bank is definitely well vegetated. You mean the
path-
erosion area?
The path itself, yes.
The path, I think the path itself will be maintained as dirt because that's what it is. And it's about yay wide.
Yes.
And we're not planning to expand it at all. And the reason we did discuss the idea of putting stairs there, but the reason we're not putting stairs there is because we feel like that would be a greater disturbance to the bank, because although it is a coastal bank, the slope is extremely low. And so we feel like stairs would actually be more of a disturbance in this situation.
Have you thought about battens, just perpendicular rolls of jute or something that can stop the water from flowing down, laid every 10, and a lot of times people will do that for dirt paths to keep washout from occurring,
Right.
and you can do it with natural material, just like with a roll of jute.
We could certainly consider that. We were
Just
just
an
going to
idea.
try and maintain it at first and see how often we had to actually smooth that area.
And you're not doing fill, you're just smoothing.
No, we're just smoothing.
So it's basically gullying out,
Yes.
and you're just flattening it.
Exactly. Yep.
So the idea is to stop it at the top. That's what we're talking
We're
about.
planning to stop it at the top, yes, because it's very clear that that's where this is coming from.
And that's with, you're putting some stone and gravel at the top, or can you describe the top better?
I think actually we're picturing more just to fix the dirt, and we've even discussed putting in grass, but we decided we didn't think it was going to hold, so really we're just going to try and maintain that as much as we can, and it may require just repeated, smoothing of that area to make sure that we're maintaining the right grade over the season, and then we're going to go from there. And if it seems like we'll come back with any additional things that we feel necessary, but that was going to be our first strike.
So it's effectively almost just a maintenance type.
That's a
It's barely
maintenance,
an
yeah,
NOI.
and then it's really about the porcelainberry, whether
Yeah.
or not.
Okay.
I think just to add to that, why all of this got kind of lumped into the notice of intent, I think it was also to kind of get that maintenance activity in front of the board and kind of normalize. So going forward, as they're doing it, that's been something that's been conditioned before. So if there's things we're looking for as a trigger, it's part of the process and not something that's going on outside of it. So I think it sets up a better long-term management for that site.
Are you getting under heavy rainfall? Are you getting a lot of soil that's actually washing down all the way to the beach?
No, because the bank actually ends quite a bit before
The beach
the
does.
beach.
Okay. So
There's a
it's not like
span
you're
in
getting
between.
huge.
No,
Okay.
we're not.
Okay. Questions? Questions from the public?
Sarah?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Ernie Steinauer, speaking as a member of the public, and I represent Mass Audubon, which is an abutter to the project. And I want to speak in support of this project, both of maintaining that path and helping to slow that erosion, but also the control of the porcelain berry, which, as Rachel said, across the road, that whole field is now just dominated by porcelain berry, and actually throughout Quidnet, it's getting to be quite a problem. But, you know, a very big problem, and maybe out of the realm of health at this point. I don't know. But I just would suggest a condition that would specify that it's rodeo glyphosate formulation, and I think it's Renovate by Cyclopure. And I don't know if the board's ever conditioned a whole lot of cut and paint as far as concentrations, but I've used both of them on different things in non-wetland settings, and I basically use it right out of the jug because you're painting such a small amount on, and you've got such a small target area that you're trying to impact those roots with, that I think the higher concentrations are worthwhile in these kind of cases.
Incidentally, that's per label too, Ernie. Full concentration of rodeo.
For
If
clip
you're,
and
if you're,
white.
if you're painting.
Painting.
And white, yeah. So it's within the label.
So
And that's
50%.
really the way to go, if you're, you know, in my experience, if you're cutting and painting.
And then, you know, disposal and the digester and all that stuff, or treatment before it goes to seed or fruit, if possible. In the fall, it's probably not doable, but
Yeah. What was the time of year you were suggesting?
Well, we'd like to do the Triclopyr earlier in the season, and then we'd like to follow up with the glyphosate.
In the same season?
and there probably will be repeat treatments that are
Yes.
necessary.
Yep,
And, you know, follow up because the seed's going to be germinating.
exactly. I expect there to be a pretty large seed bank in the soil, and so there will be continued follow-up of this. I do not think this is going to be a 3-year project. I just think it's something that we're going to get to a maintenance level, and then we're going to continue to follow it over time.
Thanks. Any other comments, questions from the public? No. So do we have everything we need to?
Unfortunately, we do not. This is within natural heritage, and we're still within their
Okay.
review window. So next hearing, yes. This hearing, we do not.
Is there any other information the commission needs?
So we're very bad news.
Which will be given, okay? So we'll be requesting continuance then?
Yes.
All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks on April 15th.
It's going to be a humdinger April 15th.
I'm kidding. Great. You'll be somewhere else.
Bring your sleeping bags. Buffet served at 9.
Okay, so this takes us to the 117 Matticat Road nominee trust on 117 Matticat Road.
Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, representing the applicant, Charles M. and Karen A. Hale, owners of the property located at 117 Matticat Road. The existing site's a developed property that's been before the commission on a number of occasions for particular site work. With regard to the existing structure and the secondary dwelling that exists on the property. We've upgraded the septic system in the well location since the time the Hales have brought the property. The property itself fronts on Matticat Road and is bordered by a significant amount of Maxey's Pond. site is elevated somewhat above the pond itself. The pond has with it a bordering vegetated wetland that runs along the edge of the pond itself. The application before you is the Hales would like to construct a small art studio in between the existing primary dwelling and the cottage, which is the primary dwelling here, cottage is here. The art studio is in this particular area here. The studio itself falls outside of the 50. All work, there'd be no grading or work within the 25 itself. The site itself is mapped, both priority and estimated habitat. We have submitted as part of our notice of intent application with NHESP, and as of this date have not received a response yet. We do have our DEP file number, however, we won't be able to close for the waiting for the NHESP. The intent of the Hales is to construct this small art studio, as I said. It's about 20 by 16. And the intent is to, with a limited amount of clearing that we can, because it's outside of the lawn area, is to clear as little amount as we can, nestle the studio itself into that natural grade, which is kind of dropping off in that particular area, and then let that area revegetate around the studio itself. The studio is an enclosed structure and does have a small wraparound porch with a view out to the pond itself. That is the basic premise of the application. The application does set forth a defined limit of clearing. It does set forth erosion control measures which will be taken during the construction process. No waivers are necessary. It is elevated. The foundation system is just it's not a basement. It's basically a foundation wall with a structure on top of it. It will be elevated above the groundwater table in excess of 2 feet. So no waivers are required, and it is a full notice of intent application as we have closed out all the other. There were some open orders, but those have all been closed. There's no active orders presently existing for this site. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Anything from the commission for Paul?
So you don't have to bring any fill or create a retaining wall? Or
There will be a wall created, Sarah, but just on the front portion, because we're trying to maintain the front portion. If you'll notice the plan that we have here does show almost a small wall on the front portion of the structure, but the back falls off towards the wetland, and then that just naturally follows the existing
so
grade.
you're not going to be doing a lot of
No.
grading there.
And that's just a skirt.
Yes.
Skirt board around the.
Yep. Yep, along that backside. So it does have a sink in there, so we will be connecting it. We will be connecting it to the septic system because there will be a sink in the facility. I'm not sure yet whether or not they plan a bathroom in there or not, but there is bedroom capability in the site, but that's not the intent. If it's anything, it's going to be a sink and a potential bathroom within the studio. But right now it's designed. I believe they've just finished up through HDC, and they've got it approved at HDC.
So it rehooks it, the water is going to hook to the holding tank? Or?
If the sink, the sink connection would be tied into the existing septic system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The water would probably be serviced, the water line, the physical water would be serviced from the house, probably to the structure, as the well is up in here. The well services the entire, both structures as it exists today. And as I said, we did just receive the DEP file number. However, I have not got a response yet back from NHESP.
I was hoping.
Okay. There's nothing else from the commission? Anything from the public on the 117 Nantucket Road Trust? Seeing not.
Is there any, I had a quick question, any irrigation in this extended lawn? Do you know if they have it?
Do they have any out there right now? I
No.
don't know any, but I suspect they probably do. I mean, but I'm not sure whether they do or not out in that existing lawn area.
So we have 2 weeks, could you find out?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's get closer to the pond.
Yeah.
Well, if there's nothing else, Paul, you want to continue for 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
So unless I hear an objection, we'll continue this to the 15th. Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, Joseph V. Arno, 27 Easy Street.
Bob Emack for the applicant, Joseph B. Arno, nominee trust. What you have before you is a request to remove a building downtown on Easy Street, 27 Easy Street. It's located in land subject to coastal storm flowage, and it's also in the buffer zone to coastal bank being the bulkhead that borders the Easy Street basin there, here, the harbor, Easy Street's out here. I propose to surround the building with silk fence and snow fence to serve as a limit of work, and also to prevent any debris from moving towards the water. The building sits on piers right now. It's got a skirt around the bottom, and there are a couple concrete pads in the back, and an old foundation wall that I believe used to support some sort of structure. That's not there anymore. So the proposal is to remove the building, restore the grade to what was there before, and seed it to the lawn. Presently, there's a lawn right up to the bulkhead, so the applicant would just bring the grade up to match the existing grade with topsoil and seed to match the existing lawn. That's about it.
Any questions for Bob? Anything from the public on Arno on Easy Street?
I'm going to add really quickly, because he requested them. Part of the new lawn area does get within that 25-foot setback when they remove some of it, so they did request a waiver, as that is an activity within the 25.
Okay.
My only concern there is fertilizer use within the 25. Don't we have a provision?
The actual Article 68 best management practices actually addresses that.
That's what I thought
So-
it did, so it doesn't
So-
allow. use of-
Correct, but,
Yeah,
yep, and that's part of our regulation, so
that's what
that's
I
something that
just
they would
want to
have,
confirm that.
they have to adhere to. Yes.
Because I started asking about it, I'm like, well, we'll actually adhere to the BMPs, which don't allow fertilizer within 25 feet.
So, yeah, that was the nice thing about adopting those into our regulations. It makes them
Yeah, straight up right there. all the
right
time.
in.
Okay.
If there's no further questions, Jeff, do we have what we need to close the hearing?
We finally do.
Bob, you want to close?
Yes, please.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, that one continued, excuse me. Great Harbor Yacht Club at 96 Washington Street.
For the applicant, Leo Asadorian with Blackmore Associates, and here this afternoon with me is Carolyn Grant, who's the waterfront director of the Great Harbor Yacht Club, and she probably will explain a little bit how these floating docks are going to be used. I just want to start off by saying that the pier currently has a license approved. We applied for Chapter 91 certificate of compliance. The state has gotten back to us from DEP on the pier. There was just a holdup in the wording of the public access easement. That's the only thing left. The state attorneys and yacht club attorneys are trying to work through that language in the recorded easement and fix it. But the proposal in front of you are for two floating seasonal piers. The one at what we call Dock A or Pier A is approximately 566 square feet in this particular area right here. Dock B has a floating system of almost 1,300 square feet, 1,280. The proposal by Cape Cod Dock Systems is to install 4 helical anchors. The disturbance that I noted on the notice of intent form was the diameter of the blade of the helical anchor. Obviously, once the anchor goes in, it comes down to about 2.5 inches, and that's all you're going to see on the surface of the ocean itself. But I list the total disturbance of installing those 4 helical anchors, and we actually, Carolyn and I actually met with a representative of Cape Cod Docks today out there, and we discussed the helical anchor installation. Also, again, because they're seasonal piers and being helical anchors, in the off-season, the wacky caps will be placed on the 4 of them in each location to keep anybody from hitting or a dragger going over there, even though no one scallops that close up to the fixed pier. We currently have, because it's a yacht club, we currently have a chapter, as I said, a Chapter 91 application and a permit. We also have Army Corps permits that'll have to be amended for these seasonal floats as well. All yacht clubs in the United States now have been required to obtain Army Corps permits for all their floats and docks, period. So we do have a current Army Corps permit for them. As far as the tide interaction with these floating piers, what I'm showing you there is the existing ocean floor bottom. I couldn't go out there during the course of the winter and corroborate those elevations again, but the closest location that those would be sitting on would be 2.5 feet above the ocean floor. I know when we did Nantucket Yacht Club, it was a concern of the commission at the time that these things wouldn't get any closer than 2 feet at low tide. I went and measured the existing piers and floats out there, and they're drafting about 12 inches, less than that, but I was just conservative with the amount of draft of the floats themselves. The use of these strictly to contain the 420 international sailboats. Carolyn brought some pictures. I understand that the commission wanted to know what they look like, and they're used for sailing instruction and for club members, and actually, I believe the high school sailing team. And right now, they're kept on the lawn, and they're dragged across the beach and brought in. And it's the exact same situation that Nantucket Yacht Club utilizes with their new floating pier on the north side of their boathouse pier, as well as their floating system off of Monomoy. They have 3 floats out there that they keep their internationals on to access them and get them in the water quicker. The floating system won't be attached to the pier. It'll be totally independent, again, anchored down by the helical anchors, and no motorboats will be docking up there. Again, they're strictly storage for the 420s. And I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, regarding the additional use, and Carolyn is here as well to explain, how it functions. But again, we've observed how Nantucket Yacht Club has utilized it, and it's very efficient, to get the boats in and out of the water. And I've actually seen the students drag the boats across the beach, and it's much easier just to get these in and off the float than it is to be constantly lugging them and dragging them across the beach to get them into the water. So that's the purpose of them, and not for motorboats or any of that type of intrusion into that area.
Any questions?
Just a quick one. Are these the type of piers that are going to be like partially submerged so the boats can slide up on them? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Angled?
they usually probably, there's probably that much sticking out of the water. And
Okay, so
they'll
they're
be
not-
able to drag the boat up
they're not,
onto it.
like,
Carolyn
angled?
could speak that. And they don't have a problem
They're not
at
gonna sink 'em.
Nantucket Yacht Club. They do it
Okay.
very easily, so.
I have three questions.
Sure.
Your current order of conditions doesn't allow the bottom draft of a boat to be within 2 feet of the surface of the sediment, so not just the float, but also boats that are attached to it. So is the draft of these Similar to the buoyancy of the draft of the float itself?
These are centerboard boats, and they'll be stored on top of the dock,
Okay.
not tied up to the dock, on top of the dock. They'll be dragged up onto the dock with their centerboards up.
But when they're, obviously when they're put into the water to be sailing away, but they're only going to be launched from there, not ever tied to the dock?
They won't be tied up.
Okay, so that might, because I mean, you have a very, as you know, extensive order of conditions,
Right.
4 or 5 pages, so.
And even if, like for high school practice, when we put them in the water, they won't even be able to put their centerboards down until they sail away and into deeper water.
Okay. So, yeah, excellent.
They probably draft several inches.
With the centerboard,
Oh, with the
centerboard's
centerboard up, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the
just a
bottom of
few
the boat
inches.
doesn't go
Yeah.
in very deep on these things.
Another thing I highlighted in, I think you just answered for me, was the other float sections that you have in place are, right now are, this is a seasonal float right there?
Seasonal float, there's seasonal float all in here, and here as well, and here as well. And there's also a service float on the other side, correct?
The service float is,
Right.
that's Gray Lady Marine.
Gray Lady Marine, correct, as well as this, I believe.
It wasn't in on the very first one, but it was definitely in on the 9,000 meetings for all the other stuff. One of the things we asked for when we first put in all of this was shellfish surveys of the area. And I know you guys are really good about giving us a lot of the data, but I'm suspecting that before we could make a decision on this, we'd have to have a recent
Okay,
shellfish
yeah,
survey.
I think the last one David Burdick did was
Yeah.
08.
We talked about that earlier today, even though the Department of Marine Fisheries has signed off on it,
Mhm.
the commission wants eelgrass shellfish survey. We're amenable to doing it. If you feel comfortable, we have the whole summer season to do it, so.
Yeah, because that's the only, I mean, other than that, that's really the only big concern with a dock like this is shading eelgrass, obviously, as you guys know. And you've been really good about protecting this entire
Mhm.
thing, but we can't pretend that we wouldn't know that that's something you should do.
Right.
So that would be one thing I'd want to see, is just what the shellfish, do we have, the town doesn't
Yeah,
have
I was
anything.
gonna-
Nothing really current.
No.
I would say,
Doesn't it
I'd say
make
that 08
sense?
one is about
Yeah.
as recent as we have.
I bet it'd be really interesting to see what, I mean, there might be a lot less there through no fault of your own, but we need to know what's there before you put in these floats.
I did look at the shellfish surveys that were done over a period of years by Dr. Newbert, Pam, and in conjunction with David, and it changed every time they did it.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, we were putting out control points for them out in the harbor, and they would do their sections, and every time they created one, it was a color-coded graph, and I looked at one, and it would change a year later, so it's pretty dynamic
Mhm.
where it is.
Yep. So it shouldn't slow you down too much, but it'd definitely be, I mean, that's something I'd like to see.
Well, we're still within, again, like the last couple projects, we're still within natural heritage habitat.
Mhm.
The priority line runs right through the middle
Right
of
here.
the,
That's what I was
the
gonna
pier,
ask.
so-
I was thinking that,
we can't close tonight anyway, so that they can pull that information together for the shellfish in the next 2-week time period. They would certainly have, they get it in for review.
And
Time-
then
natural
you'd
heritage
be able
that's all
to
they have.
ascertain eelgrass even though it's early in the season, and it's still gonna have.
We can see what's down there. I mean, I haven't personally been in the water there in a very, very long time, so, well, not voluntarily, so.
So you're saying do a shellfish survey in the next few weeks?
If possible, or if it's something too that, I'm just not sure, I'd have to think about how you would try to condition that to go with the floats, to do the shellfish and eelgrass. I could think about it and see if there's a way to come up with it.
Because technically, it might not be popping up for.
Yeah, I mean,
There's
it's,
some that stays year-round, and then there's some new growth, but you should have some that's there. But
well, that may be something, as the commission considers it, that there may be additional ways to monitor for those impacts through the season to see what's going on.
That's really my only concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to you guys, how you guys want to
Yeah.
condition something, or if you want to wait, or how you'd like to do it. So
Mhm.
we can certainly give you guys a number of options to deal with it.
And obviously, you've thought long and hard as to where to place those. So it's not like they can go a little further this way or a little further this way. This is all based on depth and
Yeah.
access.
Yeah.
This is the end of the fixed pier, and then this starts floating docks. And then back here, it just gets too shallow. This doesn't have a depth or eelgrass issue.
We're 5 to 6 feet.
Yeah,
in
I
that
figured
area.
that was probably.
It's pretty deep.
And that's my only concern, is making sure that, taking out any eelgrass.
Anything else from the commission or the public on the Great Harbor Yacht Club?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Cormac Cotton, Nantucket Land Council. I just, in the past day or so, have had a chance to look this over, so I haven't had a chance to speak with Leo and on the project itself. Unfortunately, I have a lot of institutional history with this and knowledge of this project. We've been involved with it ever since the commission issued the original permit back in 2005 or so. Just to give you a little bit of an explanation of what the commission at that time asked for in terms of the amount of detail for eelgrass surveys. That was our main concern. That they actually had somebody dive there in July, August, and do quadrats of an expansive area for eelgrass itself, and then designed the pier in a way that minimized areas to eelgrass. And one of the things that the commission at the time discussed quite at length was the use of the southeastern pier, the use of the east side of the southeast pier. Originally, there was proposals to use both sides, and the commission at the time had them remove piers on these sides or floats on these sides and really contain it within here. So, and that was because of the eelgrass. We are seeing some expansion now of that original use and intention, so I think from the Land Council's point of view, we'd love to see a little bit more documentation in terms of the potential eelgrass impacts, shellfish impacts. We and the commission at the time really wanted them to stay away from using floats because floats prevent almost 100% of sunlight from entering the bottom, and that's the number one thing that the eelgrass needs is sunlight penetration. What else? As part of that permit, there was also a mitigation component, and through no fault of yacht clubs, but the mitigation components of that permit and a subsequent agreement that they had with us really relied on additional helix moorings within the harbor. That was put on hold by the harbor master, so unfortunately they haven't, in my understanding, I might be wrong, but they haven't successfully completed the mitigation that you required through the original permit. So now they're asking for additional use that might require additional mitigation. It might be too soon. Again, I'm just reviewing this. We have a very positive, I feel, relationship now with the yacht club, and I want to work with them on this project. But looking at it as is, it seems that there's more information that's necessary for the commission in order to make your decision under the rules and regs.
Thanks, Cormac.
Oh, and if I could add, Mr. Chairman, I would feel I wouldn't feel very comfortable from an assessment point of view of the eelgrass if the eelgrass was determined after the actual structure was put in. It seems a little back to forth, back to front. I understand the need, but this probably should have been done way back when the actual assessment could have been analyzed. Thank you.
Anything else from the commission or the public?
So this is showing the survey points or
No, just the amounts.
coverage? Yeah.
There were a number of those studies done over a period of time.
That's a lot of
Just
eelgrass.
alluded to.
with me.
Yeah.
We're okay.
Do you have any follow-up, Leo?
No, the yacht club has actually been working on that mitigation for a while. We've been held up for about 2 years now because of the request of the harbor master and the regridding of the harbor in the helicals. They've been trying to replace as many helicals as they can to get the trigger number for the replication of the eelgrass. Obviously, you know that the mushroom and the anchor and the chain pulling around is destroying it, and the helicals eliminate that. But we've been asked to stop until they grid out the harbor and have a permanent placement, for the helical so we can finish. And it's been about 2 years now, I think,
Yeah.
since the last helical anchor went in as part of the program. And they're just trying to hit the correct numbers as far as square footage of replication and mitigation.
Something where we should.
Is
An
there
update from the harbor
a
master.
current better alternative? I mean, do they make a float with a
More
like an
penetration.
expanded metal or
Clear plastic float.
something that lets
Don't
the light
laugh.
through? Is there anything in existence?
I mean, it doesn't have to be opaque.
No.
It could be a transparent float that lets sunlight through.
I just don't know if there's anything available.
Yeah.
This question.
I suppose if you get a clear acrylic type of material, I mean, we could certainly look at it if that's the commission's orders. So,
Shading's the tough part, especially
Yeah.
when you've got, this is a good area for eelgrass, or it was, so, or even,
Can I ask a question? You're saying this was the good area?
Yeah, that's
And
what that
so
shows.
So this is not the concern?
Well, actually,
Looks like
pretty-
that's
pretty
pretty,
easy.
both of them are pretty,
As long as it ends back with me, you guys can use it as much.
where it's red, that's where there's a lot of eelgrass.
Mhm.
So,
yeah.
Can we see that down here also?
Yep.
What year is that?
What we need to see is what the
What's
reports
over there, yeah.
05, and I know David dyed that every year for a while.
Yeah, there may be more recent
Yeah,
data.
it was
than 08.
yearly
It was
reporting.
Enter's consultants that did it.
All right,
Interesting.
yeah. It was Dr. Milford and her staff came out and did the.
This is 12 years ago we're talking about.
The original.
Yeah,
Right.
A couple of them shared with me. so
Yeah.
it's-
And I was
Well, I
out there.
think- Yeah, it was Dr. Burdick that would come and measure the scour marks
Yep.
for the mitigation that Cormac is talking about. And, but it's been a couple of years, ever since we put up, the dock master requested that we stop installing helixes, we haven't had any measurement or progress studies. But we are perfectly happy to do that for this project.
Awesome.
Well, you need to continue anyway, I
Right.
guess, huh? So do you want to come back in 2 weeks, or what are you thinking?
I think you're probably going to want to see a eelgrass shellfish protocol.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I can get it done in 2
And the
weeks.
data up to now, which is from
Yeah.
2 different sources, and
Right.
it's taken a while to.
Plus, we're going to be irritable as hell on the 15th.
Well, you can order the other option is you can
forgot
continue to
about
the
that.
15th, and if you don't make the information submission deadline by the Friday before,
Right.
submit a written date for when you think you might have a better idea for your time
Go
frame.
Why
for
don't we
15th
continue
then?
it to the 15th?
Doesn't hear an objection, we'll continue this to the 15th.
Okay.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
I'm just looking at
Thank you.
at our agenda. I wasn't even on taxes.
Okay, let the fun begin.
I'm
Now we
already
go to the
puking
public
blood.
meeting, request for determination. Right, at 40 Pacoma
go.
Road and Medawi Creek Road.
Well, let's get this stuff picked up and clear the battlefield here.
I got another big one.
It's the same thing we have in our packs, is it? Oh, there we are, all blown up.
What happened to that?
These all show the same thing, do they?
Kevin, you up?
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Dale. I'm a local attorney. I represent the applicants Bob and Suzanne Wright. The Wrights own property at 29 and 33 Dewey Creek Road, and they also have an ownership interest in the way adjacent to 40 Pacoma Road that was recently clear-cut without a permit by the owner of 40 Pacoma Road. With me today on behalf of the Wrights are Art Gasparo from Blackwell and Associates here in Nantucket, who is familiar with the site and did with the flags out there, and Brian Butler from Oxbow Associates. Brian is a wetland scientist of some renown who's been working as a wetland scientist for more than 20 years in Massachusetts and New England. The Wrights have filed this request for determination to have you, as the commission, evaluate, correct, and confirm the wetland resource areas on the land adjacent to the Wrights at 40 Pocomo Road and also in the way owned by the Wrights. And contrary to the wetlands delineation plan that was submitted by the owner of 40 Pocomo Road in support of the local order of conditions NAN 118, the data in the field work developed and gathered by Brian Butler and Art Gasparo indicates clearly that there's a bordering vegetated wetland spanning the 40 Pocomo Road lot and the way, not simply an isolated vegetated wetland that's only subject to local jurisdiction. This bordering vegetated wetland is subject to both local and state jurisdiction. Further, the size of the actual wetland resource area is larger, significantly, importantly larger than the size of the wetland area shown on the prior local NOI plan for 40 Pocomo Road. Further, even if it's not established that it's a bordering vegetated wetland subject to state and local jurisdiction, it is clearly isolated land subject to flooding, which is subject to both state and local jurisdiction. Lastly, there's very significant evidence that this area, this basin that spans 40 Pocomo Road and the way, has all the indices of a vernal pool. And it's important that that be evaluated to determine if, in fact, there are fairy shrimp there and it is a vernal pool. Now, the Wrights are asking the Commission to establish these wetland resource areas based on what's submitted. And again, Mr. Butler could speak to you clearly and specifically about the technical reasons why there's a bordering vegetated wetland or isolated land subject to flooding in a vernal pool. The Wrights also ask you to revisit, reevaluate, and rescind the local order of conditions, NAN 118, subject to your authority under paragraph 15 of the general conditions of that order and paragraph 6 of the additional conditions, which give you the authority to go on the property at 40 Pocomo Road and determine to your satisfaction that the wetland resource areas there are what they are. Now, the Wrights say, and I want to state that the plan that was submitted with the prior order was erroneous and deficient. It didn't show the correct size of the wetland. It didn't show the correct identification of the wetland. It failed to indicate that there would be a requirement of at least 2 feet of vertical fill to construct the driveway. They said there would be no alteration of the driveway. The extension of the wetland into the way creates a pinch point that allows no traversing of that way wider than 17 feet without trespassing onto the right property or going right across the wetland.
Yeah.
And the concern here is that the Commission's regulations, local and state, be complied with, that things are certified correctly, and if there's any question about any of my presentation or any of the things I've stated, I encourage the Commission to retain its own third-party expert and go out there and look at the data and the field work and everything else to see that the prior notice of intent should have been filed with the state as well as this Commission under the local bylaw, and it wasn't. So in summary, I ask you to confirm the wetland resource areas shown on this plan as a bordering vegetated wetland moves into the way, as shown there. Determine that it is land, isolated land, subject to flooding, that requires both state and local permits. Evaluate it for the indices and criteria to determine whether or not there's a vernal pool on 40 Pocomo Road parcel. And ask the applicant, rescind the prior notice of intent and or prior order of conditions, NAN 118, and require that applicant to submit accurate information both on the plan and in the narrative. I would add that the septic system shown on that plan, prior plan, was deficient. The Board of Health has rescinded that permit. It showed no reserve area, which is required under Title V. And there are a number of errors in there. I could list them, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask to see if you have any questions, to see if Mr. Butler and Mr. Casparo want to add to this. Thank you.
Any questions for Kevin?
Be good to hear from these guys.
Do you guys want to add anything? Yeah.
Yes,
Brian
please.
Butler from Mosquito Associates, and I think you know Art already. Just in reiterating, I'll try to not be too duplicative of Kevin's statements. We were asked to look at the site, particularly the way that's jointly owned by the Wrights and the trust and at least two other partial owners. And upon viewing the site, there was standing water at the time of our site visit beyond the wetland flags. That does not necessarily make a wetland make. I've been in up to my ankles in many occasions where in basically a well-drained upland at the appropriate season. But in this instance, we also had, and this is all contained in the narrative, so I'll be Reader's Digest level if that's it, unless the commission has specific questions. What we found, compelling hydric soils beyond the extent of the flags that were submitted with NAN 118, and we represented our findings of jurisdictional wetland within flags WF 1 through 4, as shown on this plan and on the survey plan that Art prepared. We had low chroma depleted soils. We had plant community that with basically 3 or 4 dominant, depending on where you do your plots, species. Black gum. This whole system here is basically a Tupelo swamp. It's a palestrine, deciduous forested swamp with Tupelo being dominant, or black gum. We have Tupelo within the wetland boundary, Tupelo greenbrier, which is facultative, arrowwood, which is fac wet. Tupelo is fac also, and there's a grapevine that grows in there. In some portions dominant in the kind of open canopy areas that may be dominant very locally. We don't know the species of that. There's 2 species that are, often there's 2 species that are wetland, and there's other more rare species. But notwithstanding what the grape is categorically, we still have dominance of wetland plants within our perimeter here, and supporting wetland soils, and I think those are documented in the materials we've submitted. We did find hydric soils beyond the limit of our flags here in some locations. We didn't log each and every soil sample, a soil profile there. It's not necessary to do so, but we used a professional judgment where we started to see the cedars and some other, even though they'd been cut over, but where we could see indicators of upland vegetation and pockets of upland soil. We drew our line where it was most conservative. Basically, most of the time I'm representing applicants, not representing situations of this nature, so my job is to be conservative of upland, and so by applying the same parameters here as I would from the other perspective, and then I don't have to track what I'm telling people. It's easy that way. So we found hydric soils beyond this, but the plant community wasn't supportive of that. So we had all 3 parameters within the zone. We had standing surface water, again, out of the growing season, but certainly isn't going to go away tomorrow. We had a compelling plant community, and we had very compelling soils there. We checked other places on the property here, on the right property, just to make sure that the soils globally in this area, since I wasn't familiar with the site, sometimes you get weird anomalous soils, and they don't really tell you that much. But literally in a 10-foot horizontal distance from here to here, we found a transition from compelling hydric to transitional to upland soils, so I was convinced that we had normal circumstances from a soils perspective. Within here, we certainly had water seeks its own level, so the water, here was level with, say, about at the edge of this clearing here. So we had standing water out to here. That tells me the elevation throughout here is similar. So this is a bordering vegetated wetland by virtue of any internal or external drainage. And there's one category. We'd have a state buffer zone, and we'd have a number of other regulatory ramifications of that. Short of that, it seems quite compelling, and it was also acknowledged in some of the Mr. Perry's reports, and I think otherwise it's very likely isolated land subject to flooding. This is about 0.9 acres here, and it could be up to 1.3 acres depending on where the boundary is out here. And a depth of between 3 to 4 inches average through this whole area, that would be a quarter acre foot. And then you have the border isolated land subject to flooding, which has performance standards, and would require compensation minimally for the fill that would be proposed here under the NAN 118. So that's significant. We think, or we're quite confident, that this is also federal jurisdictional wetland, which again has some ramifications. If you're going to fill it, it's under the 5,000 square foot threshold for a Category 2, but if there were no other permit, it would require a permit, or at least notification to the Army Corps. And again, then moving on, the vernal pool prospect was mentioned in the public hearing, looking at the minutes from the meetings. And we've been out there, viewing the site, and there's probably 8 or 9 inches now of water in this area. In this area, it looks like the deepest from the ortho aerials. This is the most current, either 13 or 14 version. Earlier versions show, depending on when the shots were taken, much more water out here than shown in this one, or at least through the canopy. You can see it depending on the angle of the sun and so forth. So we believe that the flooding is probably continuous, at least in this area, and if it's 6, 8, 9, 10 inches, it's certainly within the parameters of quarter acre foot volume. Again, filling that with a driveway here, the side slope of the driveway would require compensation and a filing of the act. If it's a vernal pool, which again seems to have an adequate hydro period to support fairy shrimp, which are the only obligate island species, invertebrates, it's being flooded through the winter and into within 2 months of the growing season. That's more than adequate for fairy shrimp reproduction. It doesn't have to have that every single year for fairy shrimp to persist. Their eggs are durable. They'll last 50 years in a dry, dusty condition. So we think that it's very, very probable this is also a vernal pool, which has ramifications under the Act for isolated land subject to flooding. If it's vernal pool, the protectable threshold within 100 feet within the resource area. The Army Corps General Permit is very critical or very important in this. If you're filling a federal jurisdictional wetland, you have a vernal pool habitat under a general permit. It's very, very significant. It's not your purview, but it should be addressed. And finally, the bylaw, you have definitions under 1.02, I think, for determination of the vernal pool status, and then under Section 3, you have some pretty restrictive, protective measures in the bylaw. It would extend a 100-foot protective zone around the high water mark. So all these things are, at this point, not presented to you, not understood, and not able to be evaluated by the Commission in the matter of the construction under NAN 118. And it's of significance to our client. They are partly owners, as I said, of the way, which will be used lawfully, but used for access to the point, and by the fact that they've already cleared onto the rights property in the pre-permitting alteration of the resource area. So that's why I'm here today. That's why we're so engaged at this point.
Any questions at this point?
Yeah, I do. On the discussion of the plant communities, did Oxbow and Associates submit any of the DEP data forms on I'm trying to think of the name of the form where the plants are counted
DEP
out?
appendix.
Yeah.
They had their report that they submitted that included their soil profile.
I see those. Yeah.
I don't believe the report had the specific like cover page with it.
So what we have heard are the conclusions, but we haven't seen the underlying data on that.
If I could respond, I can hopefully inform this situation. DEP data sheets are informative, but that's about, in this situation, they're also subject to manipulation. The manual says you use a 30-foot radius for a tree canopy, a 15-foot radius from your center point for the shrub and sapling community, and a 15-foot for the vine community, and 5-foot for ground cover. Here we have a couple of confounding variables that don't make that apply unless you wanted to manipulate that system. One thing, you don't have the 60-foot, we're talking about an apex on a wetland, and we're talking about an area that's been disturbed. So to do that exercise, we can do that. I tend to not want to rely on those because they don't give you a finite point on the planet, an XY position where they tell you there is a wetland, they tell you there is a upland, but they don't tell you precisely where that boundary is. And so we didn't submit that. We submitted soil logs.
Commission policy does ask for those, I think.
Yeah. And we can provide that, but again, they'd be subject to professional interpretation and the fact that the site has been altered within the resource area confounds things. The DEP then says to rely on soils. So if we read the DEP 1995 manual, they say in an area that's been disturbed, where the vegetation community has been altered, utilize soils and professional judgment. I think that's essentially what we've done.
In this case, the alteration is the clear cutting?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It'd be pretty hard to do the plant community in there.
Yeah.
One of the discussions was, that I think Mr. Haynes brought up, was disturbed soil. I mean, and it sounds like you were verifying that when you took all of these soil pits, you didn't see fill brought in. I mean, that sometimes the issue is
disturbed historically through farming or other, but there's a thinly developed A horizon through there, so it's probably not from the deglacial. There's been some manipulations in there, but there is stratification that's typical. You have a thin, dark A as specified in the NUITEC manual, and then below that you have a depleted matrix with organic streaking from the A. There's not very much modeling in there, and this because it's such a coarse substrate. It's really loamy fine sand to sand, and so there isn't a lot of water retention. It flows quite freely through that matrix, whereas in a more compact soil you get better developed model streaks and inclusions.
but it's saturated enough to see depletion and to see the color, the low chroma.
I didn't mention this before, but by definition, the bylaw definition for swamp describes a plant community, and this would be, again, a Tupelo swamp.
Right.
Not a typical statewide community, it's Cape and Islands only. But it also references soils within 18 inches of soil surface at some point during the year, so we have 18-inch more soil saturation than is required to qualify for the definition of swamp as certified.
My other question might be for Jeff. One of the things that you bring up is isolated land subject to flooding versus whether it falls under bringing up the fact that it should have been under the State Act from one of two ways. Either as opposed to just being an isolated vegetated wetland, whether it is a bordering vegetated wetland or isolated land subject to coastal flooding, and this is, or subject to flooding. This might be a question for you. Between those two, what separates those two?
A bordering vegetated wetland and isolated land subject to flooding. Well, some of the characteristics that Brian's talked about pretty extensively with the presence of wetland vegetation and also the development of hydric soils and essentially meeting the criteria and the definition of bordering vegetated wetlands.
So it's looking like it's because isolated land subject to flooding is just if there's standing water there on a certain acre foot.
It could be barren vegetation.
Right. That's how I understood it.
In case 15-acre cornfield was determined there was ILSF in the middle of it. It was foolish to me, but it was, from a regulatory standpoint, it was accurate just because of the very subtle contours of it. In this case, we may have either flow internal to this, in which case it would be bordering, or if there is anything to this graphic here that DEP has provided, if there is an invert on this end of the wetland that kind of dictates how high it floods, and it discharges even by a short length of stream, then it would be bordering. We haven't had permission or asked for permission to go onto 36 Pocomo to investigate that. If not, then the determinant elevation is down here, and the flooding elevation is probably considerably greater than either the previously flagged wetland, our flagged wetland, or, it will follow just the contours. So we don't know where that is right now, but it's typically of greater extent than any vegetated wetland in most states.
Sure.
So it could.
But for function, it's already functioning as a wetland. It's whether we would consider it bordering vegetated or isolated.
Putting it in the correct pigeonhole, but we don't think that's been accomplished yet.
Yeah.
Or multiple pigeonholes, actually, depending on state and local regulation.
Arthur Reed, I represent the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, which owns a 11/15 interest in the land that the right-of-way in question is within. This is not an abutter's way. This is a corridor of land that is part of the land that belongs to the foundation and to three other owners, including the rights. The foundation owns 11/15, the rights own 1/15. And there are a couple of other owners. And the foundation and these other owners, I think in the NOI that was filed, it resulted in the local order that you issued. I don't believe that the owners of that tract of land, which work was proposed on, were included as additional owners on that application. I will concede that the owner of this property appears to have rights in the right-of-way, but when you're doing, when you're issuing an order that involves the use of property owned by others, my experience has been that you expect to have that person shown on the NOI and then recorded against their title when the order issues. In any event, as to the specifics of the matter, the substantive aspects of it, we are very concerned about this project, and rather than repeating anything, we don't have any expert material to present at this time, but we would we agree with everything that's been presented to you by the rights representatives.
Thank you.
Does that necessitate having to rescind it just because they're...
Well, I think first and foremost, let's deal with the request for determination that's at hand.
Okay.
And then once we've dealt with that, we can choose to take a separate action, because that usually involves a separate. We've dealt with one of those hearing requests before, but that would involve a separate hearing and determination to do. So I think if we stick to the application at hand, if the end result of that provides information or a substantive change that may require that action, then we can appropriately take that action. So we should just stick to the request in front of the commission.
Prior
and then-
RDA rested with 40 Pocono, not necessarily with okay, anyway.
So we're hearing the request for determination on this specific matter, and then if
Yep.
this is determined in one way or the other at some point, if there's substantive action that needs to be taken in regards to a permit that's been issued or another activity that's taken place, at that point, I think that would be the appropriate point to take action, but not
the
until.
NCF should have been listed probably on the original.
Can't hear.
I'm sorry, I was asking Jeff of the Conservation Foundation, should have been listed as a co-owner on the first.
Again, I think that's a better question. I don't have that filing with me. We could look that up, but I think, again, to deal with the request for determination, I don't think that is necessarily, well, it may be relevant to what the end determination may be, to deal with the actual request that's in front of the board by this application.
Okay.
I don't think that necessarily is critical to the request at hand.
The relevant thing would be
I agree with that. I just want to call it to your attention.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
But the
I agree.
NCF is now listed as a co-applicant. This
Yeah, they're at the table
with
now,
the
that's
rights.
for sure.
Yeah, they're.
Yeah.
Actually, with the request for determination, as Attorney Reed said, notice of intent, you actually need a signature from all the fee holders, from my understanding. Our request for determination under 13140, you only need to provide the owners. You can file it as we've done on the 40 Kokomo, and we have certified mailings for all the
Other owners.
the aggregate 15, the 15 owners, 11 of which are the trusts, and 2, I think, are the rights, and we mailed copies to each of the 4 or 5 record owners.
So we've complied with the notice requirements
I
for the
understand.
request.
Okay.
But a
Whereas
probably
the
has signature.
notice of intent, NAN 118, was deficient with respect to notice requirements.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go back to the...
Just to not convolute it any more than it is. The request in front of us today is a request for determination of applicability to evaluate the wetland line that's shown on the plan in front of you.
Today, yes.
Today.
Yeah.
If you guys make a determination at some point that changes how we made a decision on a separate filing, or you choose to take an action on a separate filing, that would be a different matter on the agenda. I don't want to get a...
Yes, yes.
Having lived through a number of other hearings where we have hearings on top of hearings on top of hearings, I would like to keep this one specific to this application and what this application is specific to, and not make it more confusing.
Yes, I think the outcome of this could inform you on...
Correct.
on
It could change a
in
piece of
different-
information that's important to a different hearing, at which case you guys could take an action based upon this determination if it is made.
Okay, so let's get back to the matter at hand in that case.
I have a question. I don't know if this matters here, but there seemed to be more extensive clearing than what's shown here, like the entire way. So was that done by the Conservation Foundation?
Mr. Chairman, if I could...
Because it's not that.
This is done on the adjacent side with GPS and estimated with a rangefinder, and it's not complete. It goes all the way down the way and goes all the way down the southerly portion of the property, but this is just in the area that we were kind of looking at. So we used one of those little rangefinders and shot trees and then,
Ms. Harrisman, all of the clearing was done by the owner of 40 Pocomo Road.
Right.
The Conservation Foundation, the rights, had nothing to do with the clearing.
We were in fact quite shocked when we went out there
We're
and
notified.
found out about this and found out what had gone on, the extent of the clearing and so on. Shocked.
I've seen that movie.
I really have been,
You've been good, yes.
last time I worked for the Wrights with Kevin Dale was on in 2002, and they were doing an addition onto their house, and during the site visit, the commission found that there were trails cut through the wetlands.
Ancient history.
It's ancient history, but
Let's just please stay to the applications at hand.
Everybody's shocked by everything that everybody else does.
Yeah, so. If I may, if I could respond to some of the things that have been brought up here. In terms of the isolated versus bordering vegetated wetland, I do agree with Mr. Butler that there is, on the data layer over on the 36 Pocomo Road, there is a stream or some sort of a waterway shown on that data layer. However, in the commission's files, they'll find a request for determination filed on 36 Pocomo Road in 2006, which showed two isolated wetlands, one here and one being the extension of this isolated wetland over here. It was determined that this was an isolated wetland at the time. No stream was found at that time. This would have been upgradient, and it was not drained any other wetland. There was no stream over here. There was no other wetland over here that this was draining from. I'm sure Mr. Butler did not have that information, but so that eliminates this as a bordering situation. So this would still remain an isolated land, an isolated vegetated wetland under the local bylaw and not under the state jurisdiction. I have also looked at this area up in here, and I felt, my opinion was it was dominated by upland plants. It was also, seemed to be in Laurentide Environmental's opinion that there were upland plants that were dominating that area. The soils, I also acknowledge that they are depleted in that area. They're beautiful white sand all the way down. They keep going. But right over here in the berm that's about 4 feet higher, there's also white sand. So, I mean, I don't know what it is. What's going on there, the soils, I don't think are conclusive necessarily. But I also, under the Wetlands Protection Act and under the wetland bylaw, you need to have soils, hydrology, and vegetation. In this case, my opinion is the vegetation is non-hydric.
So, could you explain the significance of the soils in the berm?
And we did go see this, you know that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Including the soils.
They appear to be similar to what was under the wetland, the white sand up in this berm over in this area right along here. In that area, I felt it's obviously been reworked in the past and disturbed, and I didn't know if more sand was brought in. I didn't know if sand was brought in to fill this area in the past, albeit lower. So I'm just raising doubt about using soils as a definite criteria in there. But the vegetation in there, I felt was dominated by, there was Tupelo black gum. There was also arrowwood. I felt it was catbrier, which is a fac up species, and cedar was found inside, and fox grape. So I have provided a wetland data form for that. I don't agree. We don't agree on that, and that's where we stand on that issue. In terms of the isolated land subject to flooding, I would concur that after seeing it, as I said during the public hearing, when I did the delineation out here in April of last year, it was basically dry. And there was not really, no bells went off that it was going to be isolated land subject to flooding. In looking at it today, I would say definitely it's isolated land subject to flooding. That would make it a state jurisdictional isolated land subject to flooding with no buffer zone. So the work that was previously reviewed and approved would not still be under the state. So anyway, and the boundary of that isolated land subject to flooding is approximately what the wetland boundary is out here. It could be slightly higher, could be slightly higher. In terms of the vernal pool, we had a long discussion in the public hearing for the notice of intent about whether or not that was a vernal pool. It was not shown on the natural heritage maps as potential or certified, and as I said in last April, I saw this area dry. I said, okay, this is, I didn't think it was a vernal pool. This year, we have agreed to, after the public hearing and in the order of conditions, to determine whether or not it is a vernal pool or not, and to determine what the extent of it is as part of the order of conditions. And we've agreed to do that, and we've agreed to do that. In terms of the boundary and the jurisdictional areas, isolated land subject to flooding can include the bordering, the isolated, the vernal pool, and that makes that all a resource area under the state. However, the limits of a vernal pool are within 100 feet of the extent of the vernal pool within the resource area. In other words, it doesn't extend. If the vernal pool ended there, then the extent of the vernal pool would extend to the ponding. If I'm just saying if it extended to there, then the vernal pool would extend out 100 feet from that point to the edge of the resource area, whichever is less. In other words, it doesn't extend out 100 feet. It doesn't have a buffer zone on it. It has its resource area would extend up to the edge of the vegetated wetland. In other words, it does not extend outside of a jurisdictional area.
And I hope I made that clear.
I think you did. I just wanted to, it's very confusing.
Mr. Chairman, let's keep this focused and organized one at a time, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. You're finished or not?
No. So what I'm saying is that and we're not supposed to be mixing apples and oranges here, the previous thing, but what was proposed before was not, that still wouldn't make it into state jurisdiction. This still wouldn't be a state jurisdictional area up in here. This may be a state jurisdictional area, but since isolated land subject to flooding does not have a buffer zone, and the vernal pool would not extend beyond the resource area that's delineated, either the vernal pool, either the isolated vegetated wetland or isolated land subject to flooding.
But the restrictions for, I understand what you're saying about the vernal pool delineation not extending beyond the other resource, but the protections for a vernal pool are 25 feet greater than they are for.
That's your body.
Yes, in our bylaw, we
That's your
have,
bylaw, but-
so it covers more area outside of that.
But we dealt with that under the board
Yeah.
conditions, but
I hate to keep doing it.
let's stop it.
We are way off the request in front of us again. I know it's all very relevant to the discussion as a whole, but I don't want us to lose track of what the request is and what the area we should be focused on,
And which is really just
and
this
getting
triangle
distracted
here,
from
isn't it?
Whether
what
right
the
is
request
right or
is in
whether
front of
they-
us.
That's really all it is.
And so, I'd like to reiterate, Mr. Chairman, that I'm shocked myself that I've gone back and checked on our website and what information that the commission asks for in the DEP data forms. While we did receive them on the soils, we didn't receive anything on the plants. And to have that simply dismissed as somehow not being relevant, I think doesn't help us at all. And we heard some information about the plants, but then the forms and the DEP process is being seemingly dismissed. And I can tell you all, and we've all shared, Mr. Chairman, from personal experience, that if one approaches those forms methodically with focus and with discipline and carries through the exercise, they lead you to an objective conclusion. That's why we require them, and I would just caution the commission to what we all.
Well, it's easy to ask for them, and then they can bring them, so that's.
Exactly.
that's an
I'm just
easy
going to
fix.
say, just to dismiss it as somehow not relevant, doesn't fly for me.
Three things, if I may.
Just a question now.
It's actually one of those we have for
How much of this area was brush cut?
there. All.
All of it.
Then I
No,
mean,
no,
I-
it's the green line there by the, yeah.
Yeah.
South
Okay.
of that.
Okay, so this area wasn't, or this area was, but this area
And
wasn't.
the understory in this, it seems to have been whacked too. If you stand where that green line is and look north, the understory is kind of absent there. I don't think it's contemporaneous with the brush hogging that's done the right of way. It's a little bit strange, but it's largely intact.
I was looking at the plants in there, and I would have I'm not a botanist per se, but I would have had a heck of a time identifying anything in there except for those cedar stumps.
But the cedar stones are outside of
It's
the
not to
native-
say that there aren't people
they're
that can't.
outside, but-
I mean, there are people out there that can identify
I mean,
Yeah.
what we have.
there's a lot of vegetation still there. So
Down in here there is, but out in this sort of, out on the extreme edge,
above-
The cedars are beyond the limit of what we flagged.
Right.
Okay.
We looked at those really closely on our site visit.
I'd feel better about the plant stuff if it was allowed to regrow and done in the growing season myself, but that's neither here nor there.
We can do a data sheet, but I just want to make a point that it doesn't define whether the wetland is here or here or here. It just tells you there's this extent of, there is a wetland present. It doesn't give you the knife edge. But, when you get to this point,
If you do enough of them, it tells you right where the wetland line is.
If I may.
Kevin?
First, with respect to whether or not it's a bordering vegetated wetland, what happened 9 years ago isn't determinative of anything. If there's a question about whether or not the stream connects, we ought to evaluate it, determine whether it does or doesn't, instead of assuming it does or doesn't. We think it does. Mr. Haynes thinks it doesn't. Let's find out. Number two, irrespective of whether it's a bordering vegetated wetland or an isolated vegetated wetland, we know it's land, isolated land subject to flooding. We know it requires both state and local approval. But most importantly, we want to see the boundary of the land subject to flooding. It's not limited just to the wetland. It's bigger. So whether or not the buffer zones for land subject to flooding just come off the wetland, that's a red herring. We want to see how big it is, and it's certainly bigger than the wetland. So that's critical, it seems to me. And by the same token, number three, if Mr. Haynes doesn't know what this is, we say it's a wetland. Well, he said he looked at the soils and couldn't determine it. We'll certainly give you the plant data on the forms that Mr. Glowacki's asking for. But let's have somebody look at this that you choose to determine whether or not it has the three criteria to establish it's a wetland: standing water, plants, and soils. It's too important right now not to do that. We have an applicant before you, not us, the other one, that hasn't complied. And I'm not going to go, I know, I respect what Mr. Carlson said, but the septic system permit's been revoked, the clearing was done without a permit. There are a number of deficiencies here that I think compel the commission to look into this, to take the time to do it. So if you'd continue this matter until the 15th, allow us to provide additional information to confirm the plants are there in this new wetland area, wetlands plants, put in those forms and fill them out, show the boundary of the isolated land subject to flooding, and we may not be able to go on to the 40 Pocomo property without the owner's permission, but this commission certainly can. There's an open order of conditions. It's not final, but it's open. You have the authority under the state act and the local bylaw to go on the applicant's land to determine whether or not there's a wetland there. So that's what I'd ask you to do. Get the best science, the best facts, make a determination that works, that complies with the regulations.
Jeff, we just talked about having someone like that, having someone independent from either side that we think is good, go and look, and that might be.
Definitely.
No. I think someone like Brian. I mean, I think.
Brian does he have a conflict? If we put out for that service, we have to go through proper procurement process to obtain that to do that. So if that's the will of the commission to go that route, that's something that we'll have to puzzle out for how we're going to do that.
Is this something where we go back to Laurentide and ask them to do a more thorough evaluation, or?
We do hold them under contract for review, and they provided the original review of the wetland line. That's the red and yellow plus line that's in question, and after some revision, provided their report on that line. So that being said, I have to pull their specific comments, but they've provided comments to deal with the line that's in question before. So they've provided a review already.
We all have that. It's been furnished to all of us in our practice.
If it's to go beyond that, we'd have to bring in someone else, and I have to go through what contractually we have to do or what obligations we have to meet. That's a procurement question, but I could get that pretty quickly.
We don't have any comment from Laurentide today?
No. We just have the other solution that's there is we obviously have a difference of opinion between people that have provided conflicting data for the way in question. We have data that soils in a vegetation narrative, well, not on the DEP forms from Oxbow and Associates that are there. And we also have data forms from the previous filing for this area from Haynes, I always get it wrong, Hydrogeologic? To do it that they're different. And I will be perfectly honest when I say that if we hire another third party, that the line that's going to be there, if we tore down all the flags and asked someone to go out, that the line won't match the red pluses or won't match the blue pluses exactly because it's already hand the flags. They may be closer to one to the other. They may be outside of the blue. I think everyone will agree when you're looking at it and you're looking at soils and vegetation information that's there and you're making that interpretation that you're making your best for professional judgment at some point to determine where those flags are going to be. And if you have 10 people mark it, they might be this far apart for all 10. They could be this far apart for all 10.
We could get 10 people and then take an average.
The other option that's there, well, not most ideal, is obviously we have a number of people here who have submitted data. At some point, and I know we've done it for other projects, getting everyone in the field together at the same time to go over and discuss how we're coming to findings to come to some sort of resolution is another option as well. Whether it's possible to come to any resolution ever is a different story, and if you can't, then you still always have a backup of going to an additional party. And I don't want to drag this out forever, but I think that the main point at the end of the day is to get it correct. And if that's the path, there's lots of choices to get there. I just don't want anyone to live in a false hope that we're going to send an independent third party out there, and they're going to land on one
Well,
of
yeah,
those
I
two
would-
lines straight on.
I guess I would toss this thought out as well, which is that it is up to the applicant to present the information that is convincing. Now, we've all heard what we've heard today. Maybe some of us are convinced, maybe some of us are not. If the applicant has provided convincing information, that tells us something. If the applicant hasn't provided convincing information, that tells us something. We're not under an obligation to go hire more and more and more people until the number of experts lines up one way or another. We're not under an obligation to do anybody's fishing trip for them. Our job is to evaluate what's presented to us.
I would agree with Mr. Glowacki if I could make a few points on behalf of the owner of 40 Pocomo, which is that you could inch this, any wetlands, a little bit, and all they've done is say that there's inconclusive soils, so you should then determine that those are wetland soils. Those inconclusive...
Not said, that's not what we said.
Well, you characterize it your way, and I'll characterize it my way.
Well, characterize it correctly.
Those soils exist in a berm, which is obviously not a wetland, and suggestive of fill. So I would say that those soils that are being relied on to change this RDA are questionable reliability because they exist in a berm right next door. The plants are obviously a mix of plants that are not suggested. And if it's a mix of plants, you guys could go whatever way you want. But you've already done an RDA, and your consultant has already looked at this and said this is where the line is. And the idea that there's standing water after all this winter we've had, that there's standing water in the whole island. This has already been analyzed, and I think they're cherry picking information to try and slide this all, around, and have not submitted conclusive evidence on any of the three issues. Never mind all of the three issues.
I reject that. I decline to have that said that we're mischaracterizing anything. Mr. Butler stands...
Let's stop. We'll decide who's mischaracterizing what. This isn't a court of law. This is just a conservation
And we did
commission
look at the soils. One of the points I was going to make is we did look at the soils, and they did look really deficient.
And we looked exactly at the cores right where they were taken. And the soil core is left right there, so we could see it. And it definitely looked hydric to me. Not that I'm a big expert, but one way the burn could have been created is dredging here.
I was going to mention that.
That's, just because there's a berm further away, to me doesn't, unless we did like 20 or 30 soil cores all the way here or something, that doesn't negate, just because this has hydric soils, doesn't mean that these aren't real hydric soils. I think that's a red herring.
I also noticed a veneer of that white sand, at least, on the abutting property. I didn't go on the abutting property, but that white sand...
Well, white sand does, but this looked really grayish, very, it's more than just bleached. Okay. I mean, we could ask to see a more, to thoroughly look at the soil records.
You take a sand with a lot of iron attached to the quartz crystals, quartz material, and you can throw it out on the soil surface, then oxidation and sunlight and rain and everything, so it tends to whiten up.
Right.
You don't want the soil surface to be white. Sand is what it does.
Can I just respond to the 36? I mean, I know Kevin said it was 9 years ago, but it was actually 13 years ago. Whatever.
I stand corrected.
But I'd like to point out that Ernie was definitely there. Michael was definitely there. We were down on our hands and knees doing plant plots in an isolated depression. And I'm not sure if Andy, I think you...
Well, let's get a current evaluation, not a 13-year-old one.
But there was no stream here. It was very thoroughly examined 13 years ago.
I hate to keep belaboring this point. The request in front of us is for the wetland line within the way that we're looking at. And we keep drifting further and further to the east.
And the identification of this. Identification of
the
that
line as well as the ILSF boundary, which, as we've discussed, has ramifications as well.
But I think the applicant has not met the standard of providing convincing information on any of the different pieces of information that you would need to make the determination they're asking you to make.
Okay. I have a question, Jeff.
Yes.
On isolated land subject to flooding, how often does it have to flood to qualify? Once in 100 years, once in 10 years, once in 5 years, every year?
That's hard.
That's a good question.
Because this year, like somebody just said, everywhere's flooded.
It's the calculated flooding of the 100-year flood of
Yeah,
the
it's
hidden
a
water.
100-year event, but does it it happens once a year? That you get to the quarter-acre foot, and then the boundary's 100-year flood elevation.
Right.
But does it
Just wanna
happen?
get the language.
I think it's annually. I think it is annually.
Well, let's
Quarter-acre foot.
establish what it is.
But, I mean,
Let's actually get the standard on the table.
Minimum depth of 6 inches. It can't be 2 inches over an acre and a half. It has to be 6 inches at some point in that.
And we do know this, I mean, this has been an unusually wet year, so it's not like you
Very
can say
much
this
unusual.
year is, I mean,
All right, so how we define it in our local regulations for just land subject to flooding is obviously an area of low flat topography or a depression or basin, either one, hydrologically directly connected with the water body, extending from the banks or the upland edge of the vegetated wetlands surrounding this water body, or two, an isolated depression or basin, which on the average at least every 5 years can find standing water over an area of at least 1,000 square feet, as observed under conditions of average rainfall. The boundary of land subject to flooding, which is hydrologically connected to a water body, is the estimated lateral extent of the flooding, which shall be based on the 100-year storm event during a year of average rainfall, or by actual record if that is higher. Unconstructed drainage facilities and/or swales will not be considered as land subject to flooding for the purposes of the Nantucket Wetlands Protection Bylaw.
and that is different than the state regulation. The state regulation refers to, I can't remember, I think it's annually, 1 quarter.
so that's 1,000 square feet with an average annual rainfall, which last year was not average.
No, we had the.
So to establish it, we'd have to have
In about a month.
15 years of data, and
You'd have to determine that there's 1,000 square feet as a baseline.
submerged.
Yeah.
Every
I think on a
fifth year.
5-year periodicity.
Yeah.
And then you extrapolate a 100-year flood from that and get your boundary under guard.
Okay, so.
We don't
Similar,
have
but it's not
a lot more
exactly.
than that.
What are our options to the administrator, possible findings that we can make on an RDA?
On an RDA, you can have a couple to confirm the resource area boundaries as listed, or you can choose to, in this case, not confirm.
And that would be what? That would be the resource area on the plan supplied.
There's the
We're still waiting for more information.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to see. have
correct.
those
So
come back out
you would
there
be
and get at
making
least-
a positive 2 to confirm, a positive 2A to confirm, or a positive 2B to not confirm.
To not confirm the resource area on the plan that you have. So my view is that we haven't seen convincing information to confirm it. So, and I don't know if people agree with me or not, but I don't know. And then where we go from there, I don't know.
Well, we should give them the chance to provide that.
Yeah.
If they're
Well-
unwilling to provide it, then you have a point, but every other
I would
applicant.
say this, that we all know what's going on here. We all know what underlies all this. And we can look puzzled if we choose to, but I think we all get what's going on. And our standards are clear and set forward for an applicant to come in and to not provide the information the way we ask for it, and to attempt to dismiss it and say it's not relevant, or it can be stacked or fiddled around, but I'll do it if you really want to. I don't see any need to continue from here. I think I'm ready to say I'm not convinced, and let's pack this nonsense up and let the courts go where they go.
We'll provide
This
you with
whole
that
thing.
information. We'd like the
I
opportunity to do
have done
so.
the exercise, so I just saw Mr. Haynes' data sheet from the 25th of March. I did that exercise at our flag 3, where we had 3 dominant, I can look to my notes, but this is in the wetland that we define wetland. It's not, we don't include the cedars that are behind your back up here. This is the upland you don't. So we had 3 dominant species, 2 of which are facultative. DEP data sheet says if you have hardy soil and equal or greater than if you have 2 and 2 hydro plants. And
Mr. Chairman, I'd cut it off because now we're hearing that if we supplied you the forms, this is what they would show.
Listen, there were
And
no
our-
data.
Okay, stop. Let's just hold it right here. I think what I would like to see is for Laurentide to go out there and look at the soil. And these, because if they haven't examined this, then we have them on retainer to do this sort of thing.
Have the soil logs provided, have the DEP list of the
List the
plants
plants.
provided, which we have accepted in many other cases. This might be a rare
Rachel,
situation where someone that's normally right
Would
is
you,
not.
would you feel comfortable going out there and confirming those plant IDs?
Well, it's been clear cut? I don't think so.
There's areas that haven't been clear cut, and then the soils haven't been disturbed by the cut. It wasn't brush hog, it was cut by hand. So the roots are still
Well,
there.
No.
We have a consultant that we hold under contract. If you
Not by
guys,
hand, no.
Well, it was cut with a chainsaw. It was not brush, I mean,
Well, it's-
Mr. O'Connor is here, and he did the work, thinking that it was already.
Irrespective, let's get someone to look at
Yeah,
it.
let's get someone to look
It's
at
a really
this.
easy answer to this, is if they're gonna supply more information, and we're gonna get other information for others, it's really easy to send the consultant that we have on contract to go out and, first
Confirm.
off, field verify the data that's submitted, to go out there and see it.
Sure.
And then to provide any further evaluation that you guys deem. If you're looking specifically for a soils review, we can ask them specifically to really focus on the soils and look at it. But this is the beauty of getting data submitted, is it's really easy to take the data forms out with you into the field and say, I'm going to try to replicate what was going on and see those same conditions and evaluate that.
I think that's the way to
And
go
then
myself.
That's fair.
If it doesn't match, then
end of story.
that's when, I mean, typically in some other hearings, that's when Lauren Tide will get on the phone and he'll say, I'm having issues with your delineation, and they meet in the field and do it. So we can simply have them go out and
And
we
I
can
would
take
bring
a
up,
look
we
at-
did visually, this is one of the few where we went out as a group and all looked at.
we can certainly do that again after we have all of that review too. So,
Yeah, I think we should get Lauren
but
Tide
it
back
sounds
out
to
there
me
Good
that,
idea.
that there's the want to provide additional information, and that we're looking for some additional in the field review, and I think both those things are really easily accomplished
Yep.
without arguing further about that's what we need.
And if we have representatives
We
of
can
all the
fight later.
property owners here, is it, can we get permission from everybody right now to have Lauren Tide go out there and look things over? And
Well, we don't need their permission
We don't
because they
need
filed
it.
the
Oh, okay,
application.
so
They've
they've
got to
got-
file,
okay.
but they haven't
We
opened.
can go out and look at this area in specific and look at the data.
They
So
can't, but we can. Lauren Tide
Okay.
can.
And just as a reminder, also in place the ILSF issue that isn't resolvable, like on boots on the ground. That's-
Unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
not, so
Yeah.
that would need more data to.
We'll
I
get
think-
you more data.
Well, I don't
Okay.
think that any.
We need to get, we need to get on the property to do that. That's why you have the authority to do that, we don't. So that's why we did the.
I mean,
RDA.
will you go on the property and get that data?
With ISLF, you actually have to go backwards in time, so
So-
how that's going to happen.
You have to do drainage calculations and
Yeah.
Will
determine.
the 40 Pocomo Road owner let us go on the property and get that data?
that's a different story.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a different story.
Well, it's a question.
But
No,
I-
we can't
I
tell
don't
them.
have-
The 40 Pocomo Road has already applied for an NOI.
We know that.
And done an RDA, and that was not challenged at the time.
We know that. We just want to know if we
Okay,
go on
let's
the
go-
property and
let's
get
go
the data.
forward now.
Let's go forward and no argument.
We know what we're looking for, and I think we can handle the task and continue. So
So we'll continue this for 2 weeks?
Sure.
You can certainly think through ways that we can address the ISLF question.
yes.
Is that, oh, sorry, yeah.
It's been pretty quiet, being patient here, seeing how the lawyers are duking it out of the experts, but I'm just,
Your name for the record.
yeah, Michael O'Connor. I'm the guardian of Ellen Mary Krecker Special Needs Trust. Mr. Krecker used to live at the 40 Pocomo property. He put me as guardian to his handicapped daughter, and I went through the process of applying all the permits I thought I needed in order to relocate a dwelling to the property. One of the neighbors on Pocomo was going to tear down a dwelling and offered the property to me, which is how this whole process started. If the decisions are delayed, and they know that, a significant amount of time, the property will be demolished and go to the dump. So I'm trying to save a property. I'm also trying to do the best for Special Needs Trust to make sure that Mr. Krecker's daughter is taken care of. And I hear all the debates. It's very opinionated on how the wetlands is evaluated in my, looking at it and hearing all the arguments. So the only thing I request is that a decision is made as quick as possible. so the house possibly could be moved and go forward with, instead of going to the dump. And as I said, I was involved with clearing the land. I started with the planning board, and I said, is there any restrictions for clearing the abutting way, which I have a right to, or clearing the property in order to get it surveyed and get property moved? And they said there is no requirement to do that. You don't have to notify the other owners. You are, by right, have a use to use that way and to clear that way. And that's what the planning board told me. What I didn't know, because what you're talking about is wetlands right now, is dry 11 months of the year. This year was the first year I've actually seen water in it. It may have been always classified as wetlands, but when I looked at the GIS, the wetlands was further east and not actually where this connection is. So this is the first time I've ever seen water in there. I've been coming here for a number of years. It's been dry almost all the time. I don't know anything about wetlands or vegetation and things like that. So when I got permission by the planning board to clear, I didn't know it was actually in this commission's jurisdiction. So, and I didn't know it was wetlands. So I apologize for that. I just wanted to put on record that's what the situation is. The rights are abutters, and they just don't want the property. So that's all I have to say.
Can you tell us who the planning board said it was all right to clear? Was the person, which, so that we can talk to them about?
I talked to the head guy.
Andrew Morse.
Andrew. And I've been told that same thing.
Andrew said that was
yeah,
okay.
So the abutters don't have to be notified. The approval to clear the way doesn't have to be notified. So
well, we can sit down and talk with them.
Yeah.
And we did go through the process of getting an order of conditions for this work.
I know.
I know, we understand,
We
yes.
understand. We understand.
I'm a retired naval officer. I was privileged to have Mr. Kreck identify me as a guardian because they have no other children. And I did all the right things, I thought. And
We're not laying anything on you.
You understand, I'm just trying to do the right thing, and I see an army over here attacking, so that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, so, you guys ready to continue now?
Till the 15th?
Till the
One
15th.
comment, and I'm not trying to be flippant, Mr. Connor or O'Connor, but in terms of expedition or expediting, that to have someone do this survey work would be a quick course to resolving whether that's ILS effort. That's just that you express your concern on moving the ball down the field, and that's one suggestion on my part. If that's facilitated one way or another, we can get that plan data and volumetric data, and that would put that issue to bed.
It's just all topographically determined?
Yes.
Pretty much
Yeah.
elevation and survey?
Yes.
I don't have to survey.
Can
on the ISO, so.
We can, Mr. Chair, can we do that
Yeah, the more, well,
to the owner?
We can
We can do that.
we can deal with permissions and things outside of the
Outside of
continuation.
it,
To set up how we'll set that up.
Good.
yeah, but it's to everybody's benefit, I think, to get this resolved, so let's have some cooperation out here if we can, and I know that could be asking a lot sometimes, but,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And mistakes happen. I mean, this is not, or not. That's I think it's good that we're getting additional information to.
We're ready to
figure out
cooperate
if it's a
fully.
mistake or not.
they didn't drive a tractor into a wetland anyway, it's
Yeah.
better than we've seen, so.
I think we can bring it to resolution relatively quickly.
Yeah, okay.
I'll put that.
Okay,
for your
thanks,
time.
everybody.
Thank you.
That I think.
That was fun.
Okay, minor mods. Sunset House LLC at 15 Hollowell Lane.
What is it?
Yeah, right?
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, Black & Associates. I know there's a lot of lines on the plan in front of you. This is a minor modification for a project that's well under construction up at the end of Hallowell Lane. And the modification before you has to do with a reduction in the size of the approved secondary structure. So what we've tried to do to make it a little bit cleaner is what's in green. This should have been a little bolder, but this is the proposed structure right here. And there was an approved structure in the same spot, essentially, that was, I think, 24 by 24, and this is now 18 by 20. It's in my letter. But it's a reduction in size, and it also went from a 2-story to a 1-story. It used to have a studio space above, and now it's just a small garage type thing. And the retaining walls that were approved had to just change a little bit, but there already were approved walls. So this is really just sort of fine-tuning that, if you will. There's no substantial changes from what was previously approved in terms of the overall grading scheme. I don't have the original plan with me, but if you wanted to look at it, I'm sure it's in the file. But the contour that comes around here is the same. We just thought it would be good to have one plan that showed sort of everything that's proposed for the finished condition there. They've put in a IA septic system. This is the system. This is the site that had the drainage systems. These are all installed here, here, and here. This is the one you may recall. There was some could have been a discussion with the abutter about the overall site, and this incorporates that drainage was really put in all for those reasons.
Has this been restored? This is the one where...
No, it's still under,
it's still being worked on.
Yeah, right, exactly.
None of that's changing on Renovation.
No, but there's a silt fence, that's up along this area, and this has just been, left alone at this point.
I do have the original plan if it's helpful.
Overall, it's a reduction in size.
If it helps.
It is a reduction in size.
From Art's letter, it's going from 24 foot by 24 foot to 18 foot by 22 foot.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
what I thought it
so,
was. Thanks.
okay, well, that sounds like it.
Is there a recommendation from the staff?
I would say this is a pretty classic minor modification.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All in favor for approving this as a minor modification? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries
Thank you.
unanimously. Thanks, Art. Okay, that takes us to orders of conditions.
Oh, sorry. I have to hand out perhaps.
Yeah, I was going to say, we haven't done anything yet.
2 seconds. This part that gives me a chance to get up and stretch my legs. So then I think the first few, once we get to the town one,
Yep.
you can vote.
Gotcha.
But you can sit and listen.
Yep.
Doesn't this actually have an address for the very first one?
Amazingly enough, it does not.
Probably lots of addresses.
Is this the land bank conservation?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is the Land Bank and the Conservation Foundation off Pulpus Road.
Correct. So this
This
was
is
the
the,
culvert and the existing paths and the pedestrian
Thank you.
walkways out there. It's helpful, that aerial photograph that was for the project was really helpful to see what exactly it is. But I don't really think I had a lot of specific conditions outside of
No, it's pretty straightforward.
monitoring.
yeah, I mean, it's,
But most of it's just photo monitoring and siltation control, so
Doesn't this also include some invasive plant work within 100 feet of it? No? Yes? Yes,
Does
it
it?
does.
Don't forget.
Sorry, that was rhetorical.
No, I mixed it up. All right, so in the permit overview, we'd have
You're welcome.
invasives.
Because it wasn't listed in the permit.
What are we doing, amending it?
Yeah, in the permit overview, we need to include the invasive species.
And then that would include additional finding as to disposal and protocols.
Yeah, so I'll add, not to,
So,
so to hop in, similar to some of the conditions that are on.
For Ben, there was some proposed work on invasive species, and we've got protocols.
This adds
Something to the, yeah.
22.
At 22, and then this order permits the replacement of culvert, maintenance of existing paths, construction, blah, blah, blah. Associated land management, including management for invasive species. I'll just put it right there. I just know that was a big part of that ask.
What invasives are out there? Trying to remember. Karen, what's
So,
out there?
are we ready to issue it with that?
What's that? Oh, okay.
I think
The whole shebang.
I would ask them really quickly, since I completely kicked the can on this one, that I would add in our typical herbicide provisions, and then the condition for plant material removed to be put through the digester, but then as part of the yearly report, that they just list
Area treated,
area treated, and what they
used.
removed,
Yeah.
and species removed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm comfortable with our standard language, but.
Mm-hmm. Should be in there, though. Good point.
I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Otherwise, it seemed like it was all pretty well done and stuff, so.
So then you're ready for a motion to issue with those amendments, Mr. Chairman?
Second.
Yes.
So now you can say all in favor.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, the next one is the Nantucket Pond Coalition on Hummock Pond.
All right, so Hummock Pond is the one that was for the harvesting that was there. So in my notes, the only thing that I really had that we had is this number 19, which is pretty awesome, that they have to just keep a written record of any animals that they pick up by the harvester and return them to the water as quickly as possible. And then there's the monitoring report demonstrating the out of material removed, any animals harmed, and areas harvested as part of that. And then 21 was the one that was specific towards transporting the harvester. So we've just required that I just put steam cleaner pressure wash before the harvester is transported to the island, and then it just needs to be inspected by Mass Environmental Police or equivalent agency to ensure that no plant material is being transported to Nantucket on the harvester.
That sounds great, yeah.
And then I just added, just in case someone gets clever, that the harvester must be cleaned in that manner before going into any other water body other than Hummock Pond. So that way if someone gets slick and decides they want to throw a blank comment for fun, that
Now, the Comet does have a couple.
it may stop them before they do.
It's got a little bit of parasitic.
Well, mail
One place that
Hang
comes
'em.
close to having some invasive aquatic conditions.
Yes.
From our buddies at the.
Well, if there's no comments on this,
So but when they dispose of the material, it's going to be right by the pond, or I mean, we had talked about where they were going to place it, because it was
It's
kind of.
getting placed immediately there, and then it's getting hauled off actually to Bartlett Farm. It's taking it.
Are they going to keep record for us of like amount of material?
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to issue, Mr. Chairman?
so second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay, now the Pond Coalition on Long Pond.
All right.
No.
So this was for the foliar spray of the foliar spray of Phragmites, yes. Phragmites spraying the invasive species. This is for the foliar spraying of Phragmites on the perimeter of the pond. So I added some more conditions that I haven't added before for these things. So the first through 22 are kind of our standard ones, and 23 is the base monitoring report with photographs. And then that's when new conditions that I haven't used before start to come in, that we've asked that the vegetation surveys also go kind of 100 yards in each direction to quantify if there's any impacts from the spraying of herbicide. They find patches of dead or something that's come around. And then 25, that this came up in the last discussion about the water quality testing, and I wanted to make sure that there was a test prior to the start as part of it. And then
The only problem is you just say continue pre and post treatment sessions. We don't really say, so prior to the prior to the work, and then I was thinking we were going to say like,
Well, I think maybe it's just the wording is weird. I think my intention was to say, if you're going to go out to go spray the area, that you would need to do a sample before and after.
yeah, but no, I was being
Each
way
time.
more specific and saying like before, day of, week after, month after. And more, you could check a year after, and there might be no glyphosate.
Every day.
I mean, you could.
Well, I mean, we can.
So we
Yeah,
should
this
be
is just a
more-
framework. We can.
Yeah.
You can simply decide as a group
Mhm.
what testing requirement you want for them to be looking for glyphosate in the water.
Because when we talked to them, that's about what we were saying, was more than just one post-treatment test, because you're looking to see as it drops off. I mean, the day of, you're looking to see how much got loose. A week later, 2 weeks later, according to the manufacturer, it's all gone. But we've seen in thousands of places in the United States, it sticks around for a little longer. So what we're trying to evaluate is how long does it stick around. That doesn't mean every day
Right.
for 3 months that we're testing, but I would do probably day after application, week after, month after, something
All right.
like that to give us.
So, why don't we
that's
just
not
put that-
that's
Yeah.
It's not unreasonable.
yeah, it's like $800 with the testing total. It's not going to break the bank. It's not free, but
Are we concerned at all about, well, I remember reading that the byproduct wasn't one of the byproducts formaldehyde, the breakdown component?
there's a lot of breakdown components, yes, and one of them is formaldehyde.
Is that something that's easily tested for? Is it even worth,
Typically for
would it be at a
glyphosate,
level that you could even,
you would do a VOCs, what's called the
well,
volatile
I'm just wondering
organic
if that could be
compounds.
included, because of curiosity. Or is it the level so minimal that's not?
It'll show up in a
Just
VOC
wasn't
test.
mentioned in the paper.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's easily just, if you put it, so if you did the one before, you just say, prior to the start of work, water testing data indicating the quantity of glyphosate or other VOCs shall be provided to the Commission for review. These tests shall be continued day before, day after, week after, and month after
Yeah.
when using herbicide.
So that would sort of get hooked into those. They do,
Yeah.
they do a broad span spectrum.
Yep, and then if you make them, if it's for glyphosate and VOCs, they would pick up a lot of those things.
Oh, good.
If you remember, the last VOC testing data that you guys saw, not to tie it to another project, the water quality testing we were getting for Great Harbor Yacht Club, where we used to get those huge grids, those were
Oh, yeah.
VOC tests.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
the ones
similar
I
to
do
that.
now
remember
for different areas is 500 things. We're not
Mhm.
asking for 500. The top VOCs, usually it's $50 for a water
Right.
sample for 50 or 70, something like that.
Yeah, and then,
Okay.
so with that condition, and then that, we'll just have all reports required annually until a cert is issued. And then 27 was the one that we talked about where if the wind speed is greater than 5 miles an hour, they're not allowed to spray.
So on the plant, the vegetation sampling, we should have permanently marked plots that are, they sample permanently marked plots, including before and after treatment in both controls and treated areas.
And do you want that just once after treatment, or should it be something that's like 3 months after treatment? Is there a residual?
Well, it should be done, they're going to be doing multiple years of treatment out there, so, they should do a sample at least every year.
Once a year, yeah.
And I think it was Rachel that came up with that review of Phragmites control efforts, and one of the flaws it pointed out was that they rarely looked at revegetation, which would be interesting to know about.
What comes in after?
Yeah, we should document what comes into the site afterwards.
So we're looking, I know they proposed a series of plots. Do you remember how many? It was pretty good. I thought they had like 6 plots, but maybe I'm remembering wrong.
I don't think there were specific plot numbers, it was more transects.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was lots of transects, but I don't think there was a definitive number given.
Okay.
I mean,
So
we could
it's like a
simply
band
put that.
transect with plots on either side, something like that? Or belt, I'm sorry, belt.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because if you want, we can have those marked in the field, and then prior to the start of work,
It's probably
and
approved
do
by
a,
the...
do an on-site,
Yeah.
and just go over where they're sampling. Just
I think we should, yeah. This
They
is...
should put a stake in the middle of the plot or something. And then
Yeah,
have it
it's
just be
easiest.
like
I know,
a-
we had that similar condition on the project at Folgers Marsh, where they put in a, I think ultimately was a PVC piece, but some sort of permanent marker that was in the ground, so they knew that was the
Then they
central
can
point of
just
their.
do a
They can swing their
half
circle.
a meter
or what-
radius around it or something, so they have a meter's diameter plot or
We
something.
probably want at least 2 controls and 2.
Yeah, at least 2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, well, they have the two separate, they have the two control areas and the 2 treatment areas, so we can base them from there. All right.
Oh, and for number 20, foliar spraying is an improved method of herbicide application for this project only.
What was that?
I think what you're trying to say in number 20 is, this only, foliar spraying is an improved method of herbicide application for this project only, or
Sure.
specifically just, I'm trying to think of a way.
Well, I didn't want to preclude them if they decided they ultimately wanted to clip and drip, to exclude them, but I wanted to make it clear that foliar spray was approved for the project, so we haven't typically approved foliar spraying for Phragmites.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to word that so that it's.
Oh, and I think the 25% is way, way high for spray. It's usually more like 2%.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
sorry, that was a typo. Sorry, we
Yeah,
had
but
talked
clip
about
and
last time.
drip, you can do much more concentrated, but,
Well, we could put it in there, we could put 25% for clip and drip, and then 2% for foliar spray.
Okay.
maybe saying foliar spraying is an experimentally approved method of herbicide application for this project. Is that one, is an experimentally approved?
Well, we put that probably as an additional finding too.
Okay.
That foliar spray.
I just want to make sure that people understand that it's a case-by-case basis, and we discussed this for quite some time.
We could just put it, foliar spray is approved as a pilot project.
Only it's clip and drip.
Yeah, there we go.
This is-
Yeah. Pilot project for this application.
Yeah. I just wanted to get that across. Before the whole
Okay.
line is covered with glyphosate, which will probably be illegal in about 5 to 10 years.
All right.
Okay, if there's nothing else, do I have a motion to issue this as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sorry, I'm going to be opposed.
You don't have to apologize. That motion carries with Commissioner Oaktai opposed.
Yes.
Just a wee bit opposed. I don't want to just a wee bit for
All right, the next one, the Harborside condo in your packet, we didn't close. I didn't figure we would, but I've been keeping it in there. It's a really rough draft, but we can skip it.
Okay, so then we had the
All right, Ben, you're in.
7A Eastern
Okay.
Street.
2A Easton.
All right, this was the propagation facility project on Brant Point. I'll be honest, I couldn't really think of any conditions for it. It's pretty
For
straightforward
something in
project.
19 different resource areas, it's actually very,
It's pretty basic.
it's pretty
Mhm.
basic. I
So-
can't think of adverse impacts if I tried.
Mm-mm.
If they clean all that crap underneath the building, that'll be awesome.
Told Tara when she's putting the waiver together.
Yeah.
So you should just talk about the net benefit of the work that goes on inside. Throw it out there.
Okay, in that case, do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
Sure do.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, guys.
That motion carries unanimously.
All right, and then the last one we have is,
27 Easy Street, Arno.
that was for the demolition of that building. I didn't have anything condition-wise for this one, other than just to take us some pictures that the grass is there and the soil isn't just loose soil until they do something. I have an odd suspicion that that may not be grass very, very long.
I'm kind of wondering about putting lawn in there.
Yeah, I'm not very crazy about putting
So-
one in there. It seems ridiculous,
Until
actually.
like maybe after you use fertilizer to get it established.
No, I wouldn't want them to use
Right.
fertilizer. I mean, it's just, there's no source place to use fertilizer.
Oh,
They
there's
could
probably
plant
going to be a
lawn.
building again one of these days.
I don't think
anyway.
that grass is going to be there very long. It's kind of a hunch.
Yeah, but we can just say you can plant grass with no fertilizer, how about that?
Yeah, I mean, you could put 20 that no
I
fertilizer can be used.
honestly would not put fertilizer.
No, that's too close. I mean, it's going to almost all be in there.
Especially with all these storms that put these things underwater more often than not. It's just too close.
The ducks are just going to eat all the grass.
Yeah, the ducks are just going to eat all the grass. You can They can install as many decks as they want.
They'll
Built-in
fertilize
fertilizers.
it.
Yeah,
But they'll fertilize with nutrients that were already there, so it's okay.
repackage.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, do we have a motion to issue this as amended?
So
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay. But that's that. We didn't get through Great Harbor then.
the only ones we closed tonight, actually, we didn't close any other ones tonight, so I'm pretty good.
We didn't close the land bank?
No, we had natural heritage, but
Okay.
I can put a draft together from those two for 117 Nantucket and 21 Sackage Pond.
Okay. So, extension orders of conditions.
No, we don't have any.
Okay, other business. Approval of minutes.
Really nice getting these every week.
Mm-hmm.
Impressed.
Yeah, she had to leave, but thanks to Joe. Joe's the one that gets all those checked in, so.
That's awesome.
So if there's no comments on the minutes, we'll approve them by unanimous consent.
Right on.
Okay, so be it. Conservation restrictions, anything up tonight on that? Did that land bank one come
We
through?
do. We have that tonight. Rachel is going to explain what this is. So as she's coming up, and she explained it, so at the end of the day, if you guys feel comfortable, I know it's kind of long to read, you may have read it. At some point, there is a page in which you guys have to sign the conservation restriction after she explains it. So
However, I do not have a notary here.
we have that covered.
You do?
We have a plan for that, yes.
Okay,
I will cover that if we get that far.
okay. Because if not, Jesse's willing to come next week. but-
So,
Okay. So this is new to me, so this is an interesting exercise. I'm Rachel Freeman, and I'm here to explain to you about the Conservation Commission's role in holding a CR for the land bank. This CR is for actually a section of land in my comment, which pertains to the smooth hummocks area. And smooth hummocks was designated during the expansion of the Mycomet Golf Course from 9 holes to 18 holes. And during that period of time, there was development of a conservation and management permit. And the conservation and management permit, one component of it was putting a CR on a certain amount of land. My understanding is that historically, it is not uncommon for conservation commissions to hold CRs within a town. I
That
have
is
looked
correct.
into this. It is okay. Okay. So yes, so that's actually a common thing that happens. The reason that this CR is coming up now is because there was actually some issues with it, because this was the first CR that the land bank was designating to the town, and it was actually debated at the legislative level, because Article 97 says that the land bank actually can't dispose of land, and there was some concern that issuing a conservation restriction, having somebody else hold it, designated it as disposing land. So that took a while to proceed, and then that was okayed, and once that was okayed, during the interim, there was a declaration of restriction signed and recorded actually by the Conservation Commission, but not the official conservation restriction. So after that has happened, subsequently, during that time, the paperwork changed, and so the conservation restriction then had to be updated, and as a result, the declaration of restriction that you originally signed was no longer considered valid. Hence, I am back with the final conservation restriction in an effort to have this approved by the Conservation Commission. And if you
Okay,
guys
Rachel,
have
I'm
any
going to cut you to
questions.
the chase. What basically, I mean, I read through that, and it
Okay.
seems pretty standard. It's open space. It is open for basically passive recreation. I don't think you can, I mean, there's land management allowed for,
Invasives?
well, for maintaining it in a, native landscape, basically to maintain the grassland heathland complexes
Burns are
there.
allowed.
Yes.
burns,
Describe them.
mows, yeah.
Mows, harrowing, but no.
You can remove trees if it's,
Pine
you know,
trees.
like part of the process.
Mhm.
I don't think they could build a swimming pool or a golf course or anything like that. It's passive recreation,
Okay. So no
which I mean would
ATVs,
be no.
horses,
Well, I think they could probably ride horses, but no
We don't
motorized
have a
vehicles.
chance to look this over, yes.
Yeah.
So what are you asking us for?
We're asking you to sign off on it and
Does
agree
that
to hold
require a
it.
vote?
I guess I have a question. So does that mean normally conservation restriction holders would do like yearly monitoring and
Yes.
reporting on these
Mhm.
sites? So does that mean all 7 of the commissioners go out once a year?
Well,
Like, how
yes,
does that work?
We asked Jeff to check and make sure it is. Now, if we go out there and there's a house there, then it's
I
bad.
mean, it's open space, so we can go out there anytime we want, pretty
Yeah.
much. I mean,
No, we do them. We don't hold very many, and most of them are completely vacant. They're just vacant parcels, so.
Does this require a vote?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Still
you
does,
actually, you have to
just like-
sign it, so, yes, it does require.
So
a-
do I have a
Move
motion
approval,
that
Mr.
the
Chairman.
Conservation Commission holds this conservation restriction and we sign off on it?
That's exactly what I was moving.
Does it have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
The other one you want us to sign?
Does that land get mowed on like a, like?
Both sides.
a
It gets
land?
burned,
It gets
actually.
burnt once in
It's
a
get
while,
burned,
but
but
it's kind of in areas
that
that
type
are
of land.
probably
It's
haven't
for
been
sampling
managed
grassland.
so far. It's
Gotcha.
sort of
I will
been-
explain
She
it to
does
you.
very,
Standard-
very
standard
thorough.
treatment
I have
plan.
arrangements with.
I'm one of the people on the Smooth Hummock Advisory Committee, and it's very,
All right, so there's no specific, just the blanks above.
yeah.
A lot of stuff going on, and it's gonna get better when this person does all this data analysis for us down there, so it'll be really cool.
Yep, so just one of the 7 blanks.
Okay, excellent. So while that's going around, we'll start on our reports. CPC,
I have not been contacted yet, Jeff. I don't
No.
know what the,
I've sent them your information, so
so
you're
nothing to
usually pretty
report.
quick on it.
That's funny, I can't believe it didn't bug the heck out of you like
Yeah,
that.
So, well, they're,
I've been waiting.
to be honest, I think it partially is because we're into
Town
town
meeting.
meeting being on Monday.
yeah,
Yeah.
So this is like the absolute low of lows for CPC.
okay. NPDC,
One thing, the NHA wrote a letter to Mass Historical about the railroad bed bike path and got them to slow down the project a little bit, although the state doesn't seem too worried about it, the contractor. And a new surface has been sort of proposed for it. It is called Flexipave. And what it is it's
It sounds amazing.
it's sprayed. It's a gravel. It's like a 50% gravel and recycled tire sprayed surface, but it's permeable and
what binds it?
So we get.
the rubber, probably the rubber from the tires. I mean, I'll send the link from the company to Jeff, and you can send it out. So they were kind of interested. The board was pretty interested in it. I think the plan was not to change anything in the application, but amend it if this proves to be something interesting. Because I don't think too many people are interested in asphalt.
No.
So it's called Flexipave. It comes in different colors, and
You
it
know what
doesn't
color it's gonna
doesn't
be.
float
Did it
away.
talk about leaching?
Well, there was in the brochure from the company that I would send out, it does mention a report from UMaine, a guy who did a professor who did a study on the leaching effect of tires in a wetland, in a wet surface. And, it was pretty nondescript, basically saying it was, it didn't have much effect, but that didn't show the paper.
Don't start it out.
Yeah.
Didn't show the paper. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff out there on rubber and stuff. But I'll send it to Jeff and you can send it around.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Mosquito Control Committee.
There was a state reclamation board meeting, but we didn't attend because we're evaluating a few things. So we have a delay on our contractor because Kara wants to get some guidance on how to handle the monetary end of being a mosquito control district. So we fought for a long time to become our own mosquito control district, but we didn't understand appropriately that it involves some financial oversight from the state that the town's not comfortable doing. is the most politically correct way possible. Anyway, so we had a meeting, the state meeting, but we didn't attend because we're still kind of in a limbo. But the VDCI is already going to start doing evaluations of the wetlands, which are, you know, and of the habitat, which is increased by 9,000% because of all the standing water all over the island. So we're definitely going to have a fun mosquito year, but they can't treat until they get a contract. So they're working on that. And the treatment's with BTI for bins. Yeah, it's not we don't allow aerial spraying of adulticide, just larvicide treatment.
Anything else? Any other committee meetings or anything?
Sarah, what is the product? Do you give me?
I can
Yeah, I'd
give you
just
the
curious.
exact. Their reports are actually really thorough.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, VDCI is really good, but I can.
Yeah, I'd like
that.
to be curious about that.
Okay. So that takes us to commissioners' comments. Anybody have anything they want to bring up?
I think we already answered that the issue at the end of Hummock Pond is outside of our jurisdiction.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay, Jeff.
Well, I don't want to delay anyone else, other commissioners'
I was
comments.
trying to
If there's
think.
I
anything
don't think
else.
there was any.
Because I have a number of things.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll address that one first. So for anyone that hasn't seen or has been living under a rock, there's a project that's going on at the end of Hummock Pond Road in the Mothball Way section, where it's the installation of some sheet piles. I've been out on the site and pulled measuring tape from the edge of the resource area to the project area, and the project in its entirety is located outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. So the work that's going on is outside of our jurisdiction. So
Okay.
we confirmed that, we pulled tape, we saw it, so it is what it is.
We did
So
have one question I forgot about.
Yes.
The revetment thingy at Third Bend in Code 2. Did you see pictures of that?
I did, I just haven't had a chance to make it out to
Okay.
Code 2
I
to lay
forgot
eyes on
that.
it.
I wanted to mention that.
Yes, but we will. It is on my to-do list. So that being said, did have a couple other things that I wanted to make mention of. So we got asked as part of the town's kind of water quality initiative that's going on right now, where we're looking at, you know, fertilizers and septic systems and green crabs and mooring and anchoring regulation changes. We just did some shellfish regulation changes for dredge weights and those things. So that we've been taking a lot of time to address a number of issues, all the way down to stuff as small as starting to mark the storm drains as direct discharges to the harbor. So, by the way, we'll be doing that for the first time on April the 11th. If people are interested.
Part of
in
the harbor
participating.
plan.
Yes, and the shellfish management plan. But
Which is part of the harbor plan.
yes, so we have all of those things. One of the things that we have been trying to figure out a way to tackle is there are not many of them, but there are a few just unpermitted discharges into the harbor.
Yep.
Is
Loose cannons.
no one has really been able to figure out how to deal with it, so I've come up with kind of an interesting way to give it a shot. So I drafted a letter, and essentially what it is it's a letter. I don't want to say it's a threatening letter. You can just take the patch around. But
You don't want to say?
well, essentially what it is it's a little explanation at the top of kind of what's going on with the town. And then it's to try to encourage the people that are the owners of these discharges that when we identify them, to come into our department. There's probably typos. So to come into the Natural Resources Department and kind of figure out a way to rectify the situation, whether it's removal or plugging or alternative ways. Alternative ways to do that under the threat of potential enforcement from the Conservation Commission. Because that's all we could really come up with. Because some of these pipes are pretty old, too. That if we can get everyone to come in and at least begin to address those in one way or another, to avoid enforcement and get people to voluntarily come in, that's ideal. But if there's ways we can get to it, we can. So it's just a draft. Any typos, if people want to take it home with them and read it, we can. We're in no rush to issue it. I may end up just putting it from the Natural Resources Department and just putting my name to it and sending it out. I kind of set it up to be from here. but kind of a generic letter, so as we identify them, we can send it out. But I think since we're making you guys the heavy on this, I wanted to at least put it in front of it to say you're okay with the idea of asking people to come in, and if not, if it's a potential enforcement action, that we're prepared to pursue those enforcement.
Did you even thought to making it something like a notice as opposed to a letter?
Well, we did think about putting it out as a notice, but our concern is making sure that we may still put it out as a notice separately, but to specifically get it to the properties that they're located on, where the discharge is.
I just wonder if they might do like almost like a graduated introduction, where so somebody doesn't get a high word from the government, and we're here to help you. Kind of,
Something in the paper just saying we're.
Just a little, just kind of let it seep in a little bit on the edges.
No, I mean, that's a good idea. I mean, in the sequence of things, I mean, I think putting something in the paper, what it is. I mean, we've been pretty vocal. I mean, I know what's going on beneath me right now as they're talking about some of these very things. So it's something that they've talked about at the Board of Selectmen level for dealing with these discharges for really since our eelgrass update in February for what's going on. So, I mean, we can put another notice out, but hopefully it's not a big secret that the town is concerned about the harbor's health and those things. So
Well, some of these are on town land or on conservation land, or they were installed long ago by people long dead, and
yes,
like the Pest House Pond one is.
Yes, the Pest House Pond was probably the most famous of them all.
Yeah.
So
which one's this, Jeff?
Pest House Pond
Where is it?
pipe.
Where is that?
Monomoy.
Pest House.
Off of
There's
Cathcart,
Pest House Pond.
right, Cathcart.
Yeah, it's out Cathcart and kind of off of
To the
North
right,
Road there,
north.
and then it just drains that pond. That's not to pick on houses, but it's kind of in front of. I just totally spaced their
That
name.
pond's much better than it used to be.
Yes, it is, but it's still discharging to the harbor. So
I can
I
think of
just
the names, but I'm not
totally
gonna say
blanked
them.
out. Yeah. It's in an area where it's being drained, but there are a few other ones, and occasionally they show up. We find pipes that are magically put in that show up when the stand shift and things that to have some way to deal with those. Some of them are very new because you can see them because they're fresh, shiny PVC, and some of them are very old and they're made of like Orangeburg pipe or something that's asbestos or something terrible. So I think as we identify them, we want to be able to send something out specific to those owners to get them in to try to address it, to try to find ways to help them get permits to do a good removal or find alternatives for its purpose on their site.
I
So
think this is well written, except for managing should be managed. Other than that.
too better managing? Come on now. But it's just an idea. So if that's something, if you guys are okay with it, I can either put my name to it, or if you guys would rather have, I can track down Ernie and get him to sign them as I need him to go out.
I'm happy with it.
You could just sign a bunch and
Yeah.
then,
Do you need
Oh, you
a
need to have an
vote?
address,
And
though, don't
how
you?
does everybody else feel?
I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a
Well, if
great
you guys
idea.
simply wanted to endorse it as the board, that would be most ideal.
So
You don't have to
moved.
take a vote per se, but if it's the general consensus.
Good
Yeah, I
job.
think it's a good idea.
Send them out.
Gold star.
All right, so we'll send those out.
Send them out.
We have 4 found right now, so we'll send those out tomorrow. So,
Give me a list of where those are. I can start
Yes.
sampling in the harbor in front of me.
yep, and we can get those started to get addressed. So,
I've been doing that for Pest House Pond for 2.5 years, and on each side that.
yeah, there's the other. That was one of the main ones. The other one's also in Monomoy Shimo area. So,
Yeah.
there's a couple other small ones that
Cool.
we can address, but we couldn't think of a better way to incentivize people to deal with those.
I think it's a good start.
Other than that,
Okay.
I
Then
don't
we're
think I had
down
Do
to,
we really have an executive session tonight? I thought we were.
I put it
Well-
on there.
we had another big discussion with SPPF since the last time, and
Had we decided, though, and we're not officially in that we were going to start doing that in open session?
I don't like that idea
I think we did
myself.
kind of say that, didn't we?
You guys can do it. I'm keeping my mouth shut, though,
Okay,
and I was there, so.
yeah.
Or, I mean, it's kind of continued on the same path that it had before, so it's not like it's,
So there's nothing to report tonight? We're not going to a session tonight? Okay.
I don't really think there was a lot accomplished myself, but
Okay.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about, is the fact that there's nothing getting accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
so.
And I will say, and this is going to sound offensive, but it's the truth. Josh's idea of give and take is as long as you give him everything he wants, he'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it ends. I mean, there's nothing coming back, and I'm totally fed up. I'm ready to call it quits and just go to court.
I mean, I'll mention there seem to be 4 points. And an interesting thing that came out, but the 4 points being that I've seen some flexibility on not submitting an application for a number of years, and he was proposing 2 years as opposed to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The second point was that you want to do the they want to stick with the fourth tier bag.
All the way across, not just on the...
With an extension on the southern end to include that little culvert that's developing.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically just extending the returns. They want to finish the returns and have that one end go a little longer. They still want to do the drainage pipe, but what was interesting, that major project that they proposed with the wells was sort of an alternative to that pipe. Like he basically said that they're not sure they'd even go ahead with those deep wells.
He made it like an either or.
He wanted to present it to us like an
injection, or do that plan that came out with the
PVC.
Put one drain out in the road that goes into that trench they dug, and then increase the outflow pipe to 6 inches and go over the bank.
Well, that's quite a bit of a difference in
Yeah.
the hydrology and everything. I mean, that would have to be presented officially to us.
That's what we said. That would have to be a separate NOI.
Yeah,
basically.
that's not a
Right, and that was
sign
one.
off.
And then what was the fourth one? The fourth was the 4 points, I think.
Well, and then as far as the
tiers, the returns.
He basically said, I mean, very plainly that the revetment project is not going to go away. I mean, they may refile it, but
They've said that openly for
Yeah.
the entire time, so.
Yeah, so that's, and there was really very little incentive for them to hold off on any kind of application. Was my feeling is.
And they're also very, and when they talk about a year, they're talking like January 1st, they'll be right there with an application of that time frame. But there was the point, they were almost resistant, and I'm glad you picked it up, Ernie, about the sand being fed. I mean, they seem to want to use that fourth bag as a support for a lot of the required
mitigation
sand, which would never, in
Get
the
out.
worst case scenario, even make it into the system.
right.
Yeah, now with 3 bags, I mean, according to their data, under the worst storm conditions, there will be some overtopping of that third bag and pack some of that sand that's up there. But with 4 bags, according to their data, it'll never get up there. So that sand will stay in place even in the worst storms. And might wash down with rain, but it's not going to be impacted by waves. And Josh was very concerned about, how much sand they're losing on that site now.
So with the fourth bag, then, what you're saying, or how I understand it is, the fourth bag basically takes the sacrificial sand component out of the system.
It takes
Right.
a huge amount of it.
Yeah.
Well, until they push it, they've got to keep the bags covered because they're sensitive to UV.
Right, but
And then the covering sand does get washed away, but apparently it gets washed away in fairly, minor storms.
Mhm.
But it's a small fraction of the,
But to answer his
22.
question, yes, it does take away some of the sacrificial sand that would normally slough off the bluff.
So we talked about, well, then maybe we should have
Which is
that
the whole point of
sand
the project.
coming, being out seaward of the fourth bag and below the fourth bag, and he would have nothing to do with that because it's going too fast. And,
Well, and there were, requests for things like public access, One Big Beach, stuff that the town had put on there.
they're willing to do that.
They're willing to do
Yeah.
that, too.
And we did talk about having a beach that was at least passable
All the time.
all the time except under storm conditions,
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of danced around that a little bit as far as like, well, how much, and stuff like that, but they seem like Josh thought, well, with all the sand we're putting down there, that's not gonna be a problem, so that's okay, more or less. And I thought Matt had a interesting comment of we should let them build this the way they want it, and that way if it fails, they have nobody to blame but themselves. They can't come in and say, well, if we would have built it right, this would have worked.
Well, exactly, that goes back to, you let the engineers do the engineering. We've got our job to do, which is environmental impact, but when we get into, with any applicant, about redesigning it for them, or saying, how about if you did it like this, or do it
We
like
have
that.
redesigned it.
We can ask them about the alternatives, but when it comes down to is evaluate what's in front of us. It's permissible or not.
But he did mention how, which I thought was kind of interesting, how I guess, what is it, Nemo, they call that big storm in January?
Nemo and Juno.
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 Nemo was last year.
Juno, even though it wasn't in Juno, it was in January. But anyway, that there was actually a lot of, I don't know how far down, he said it scoured in front of that.
Well, we saw the pictures. It got down in front of that.
Oh,
that
it
lower
exposed
tier.
the bottom, the underneath
Yeah, but he
one
said
end
it
of the
even
beach.
went quite a bit lower than that, and it filled in,
Oh, yeah.
Since
During the
then,
height of the
filled
storm,
back
it was
in,
pretty
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But even during the storm, as the storm waned, it kind of filled in, so not many people got out there and saw the deep hole that was actually there, the way it sounded to me.
But we have pictures of it.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I feel like, my personal opinion is I go there and it's the same thing. We don't really make any progress. There's not much give on there. I don't know.
So when do we pull the plug on that?
It's up to you guys, I would think. Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't get the feeling like anything's really changed from the original application.
I know this is going to sound terrible. I think if we're going to go down that path, I think we should probably have town council here to make that
Yeah, I think so too.
decision if
Yeah,
we're
I
going to
think
do
we
that.
should
So,
have-
Well, I
if
think
you
that
want,
they-
I can contact George and we can try to have him down for our next meeting.
Let's do that.
And we can discuss what options we have as a group. So,
Not on the 15th. We're already going to be here until about 3 a.m.
well, we can wait till the next one too. Well, we can see, or we can try to set up something separate too. So, if it's executive session, we can post it with a 48-hour notice and put it there. So, we just have to.
Do it at 3 o'clock or something.
Yeah. Well, we could. Well, I'll talk to him and see what he has available schedule-wise. That's not on the 15th.
No, it might not be that bad on the 15th.
The Epic
We'll see.
now.
I think we had the biggest.
We have new applications too. So,
Yes, yeah.
but I can provide you guys a number of scheduling choices, and we can go from there.
All right.
That's probably a good idea. Yeah, to get George in.
We'll
Yep.
make that happen.
All right.
Okay. Well, if there's
Shoot for me.
nothing else, then,
Move to adjourn?
all in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Great movie down there. Called Short Up.
That starts in 1 minute. Starts in 1 minute.
Thanks, appreciate it.